We have a quorum. So I'm going to get started because we've got a lot on the plate. I'm sure people will join us here in a little bit. So let me just kick this off here. So I'd like to welcome everyone. Good evening. I now call the February 1st meeting of the Lafayette General Plan Advisory Committee to order. This meeting is streaming live on the city's YouTube channel and is also accessible by the Zoom webinar. And the link to the login is on the city calendar. So if I could get us going here, Sarah or Renata, can you give us the roll call, please?
Carol Singer.
She said she'd be a little bit late.
Okay. Namratha Castellanti, absent. Don Jenkins. Don, I think you're muted if you're.
I saw him wave his hand.
Thank you. Stella Weatherspoon.
Present.
Matt Pease.
Present.
Beth Needle.
Here.
Jim Cervantes.
Present.
Mike Kim.
Here.
Susie Kelly.
Present.
Christine Rasmussen.
Present.
And Chris Lee noted she would be absent.
He's traveling today.
Planning Commissioner Radnich.
Present.
And Mayor Geringer.
Present.
That's everybody. Thank you.
Thank you all. And the packet included the agenda for the meeting. I would like to, would anyone like to make a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Moved by Matt. Second, please.
I'll second.
Thank you, Susie. The motion has been moved and seconded, and the agenda is approved, and we'll move on to public comment. So this is for comment for items that are not on the agenda. And I do want to note we did receive some comments by email, a couple relating to the mission statement, which we'll touch on in a little bit. It's gone to the City Council, and a couple relating to concerns relating to density and development on the BART and Deer Hill corridor sites. So I wanted to note that we've received it and we've read it. Are there any other public comments for items not on today's agenda? Sarah, if you could please open it up.
Would like to make a public comment, please use the raise your hand function at the bottom of your screen, or *9 if you're calling it. I do not see any hands raised at this time.
Okay, thank you very much. We've got consent calendar. I don't think we really have anything on the consent calendar. It's a placeholder. So commissioner activity reports. The first one, aside from any updates that individuals have, would be on the mission statement update. And Matt, would you like to do the honors? Or?
Thank you, Chair Cervantes. We met with the City Council last week and presented the draft of the mission statement that the GPAC had voted on. I believe it was 9-0 to approve. There was a good discussion amongst the City Council members. They asked a lot of questions of the subcommittee. 3 of us were there to represent GPAC as best as possible. And then we had a number of public comments that came in. After the public comments, council came together. The subcommittee was put back in the green room, and they talked quite a bit about some different edits or different ways to approach this based on the public comments that were given and the presentation that the 3 of us made. In the end, they came up with 2 redrafts, I guess I will call it. One was a single paragraph that tried to consolidate everything we had in our draft into a single paragraph. And then a second one was a revised draft that also had what they called the characteristics at that time. And they referred it back for further discussion amongst the subcommittee with the idea that the council wasn't quite ready to make a decision yet and would make a decision at the next council meeting. So Jim and Namratha and myself and Jamie Harris, who's the consultant that's been helping us, met. And we played around with the language a bit, tried to streamline it as much as possible. And Jim and I and Namratha met with the mayor and the vice mayor today to do some further refinements and get their feedback. And we came up with two versions. One is, once again, this single consolidated paragraph that has a lot of what we approved as a GPAC. And then a second one, which the top paragraph is streamlined, and then there's the principles below there that give it a little bit more depth and detail to support the mission and vision. And the mayor and vice mayor are going to present that at the next city council meeting and once again get public comment. And their thought is to, at that point, take a vote on the two options based on what the rest of the city council thinks and make some final decision. I think, from my own personal reflections, and I'll let Jim add to that, is much of what we've done is in these two options. We think the second option, which has the principles below it, is a little bit more detailed and probably substantiates what we've been trying to do as a group over the last year, but it captures much of what we wanted with the idea that, there's some adjustments that have to be made to accommodate a larger group of people. So the three of us felt good about it. The mayor and vice mayor were very appreciative of all the efforts that everybody has put in over the last year. And so to put this through, and it certainly has been gotten due consideration. So Jim, I'll ask you to supplement anything that I missed.
I don't have a lot to add. I mean, folks, I think a number of folks in this group were dialed into the council meeting, or if you didn't, you might want to catch the replay. A lot of thoughtful discussion, and really, we did some textual editing, played around with that. It's going to go back to council. It's really their call. So look forward to council wrapping this one up so we can all move on to other things. And that's all I've got. I don't know if Mayor Geringer, you want to add anything or let it lie at this point?
No, just to reiterate what Matt said about the appreciation and gratitude, both at the council meeting and at our meeting today. So just thank you to all of you. The subcommittee led the effort, but all of you on GPAC have been instrumental. So thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other commissioner activity reports? Any updates that folks want to share with the group? Matt? Yeah,
one brief one. I met with Jeremy Levine last night, who was representing Inclusive Lafayette. He had, I think all of us, he had suggested a book that might help us as we deliberate all these issues in front of GBAC. And I did read the book over the last couple of weeks, and we met to kind of discuss it. And he shared, views that he has expressed to us in the past. I just got to know him a little bit better in terms of what his background is and, why he's got the approach he does and is passionate about this. I encourage them to participate in these next three meetings relative to taking a position on where do we put housing units, where do we plan for housing units. And he says that the group is considering that. Very respectful conversation and very productive. And I thought it was quite good.
Thank you. Any other ones? I will note, I've traded a few emails with Colin Elliott, who I believe is on this call. He was very helpful in the process, looking at opportunity sites back in the spring as the council was ramping up for the EIR work. Just trying to get some questions. I tried to answer as best I could. And we'll start talking about opportunity sites today and in more depth next week and the week after. I'm sorry, next meeting and the meeting after that. Again, we invite comments, feedback, dialogue from really any member of the community in this. Anything else from the group for outreach? Okay.
Chair Cervantes, I do see a hand raised. I don't know if you want to open it up for public comment. We don't typically do that for the updates, but there is a hand raised in the.
Okay, well, all right. And I think it's David Clark. And I guess this really would relate to what we're talking about now. We've had the general comment for items not on the agenda, right?
Correct.
Okay, so maybe you invite Mr. Clark in and Okay. David,
Yeah, thanks,
welcome.
thanks, Chair Cervantes. If this is out of order, I'm sorry. I thought it was the right place for it. But with respect to the mission statement comments, I have a couple of questions, but I realize this isn't the appropriate format for a question, so I'll just make a comment. It sounds, from what I just heard from Member Pease, that the first time the public will have a chance to look at the draft that you've worked on since the last city council meeting will be, I don't know, 3 days before the next city council meeting. Because I didn't see anything on the agenda for tonight with respect to a written report along the lines of what you just reported out. So I'm assuming that's the case. And another comment is, I attended that last city council meeting, and there was a lot. Well, you were there too, you know that, but there was a lot of input with respect to, I thought, doing away with the general principles and trying to incorporate a lot of that language into what heretofore had been labeled the vision and the mission statement together. So I'll just pass on that what I'm hearing as a result of tonight is that I think you've come up with a second option, which would retain those general characteristics or general principles. And if that's true, then I think I'm not quite sure what the starting point for that was. I don't know if it was where we left off with the city council, where if it is, there's a lot of that language. It was drawn up, if you will, up into the vision and mission statement. So if we're going to continue with the characteristics, it seems like a lot of that language that that was talked about at the last city council meetings going to need to be parsed to put that back into the characteristics. I mean, I'm a little bit at a loss because I don't have anything in front of me, but I'm just kind of giving you my impression as to where I thought we were, and based on what I just heard, might still need to be done, if that's helpful. But otherwise, I'll just look at it, whatever, 3 days before the next city council meeting, I suppose, and see what's there. But thank you.
Mayor Geringer.
I don't know if this is out of protocol, but David, what we had asked at the beginning, at the end of the discussion that we had as a council, was that staff and the subcommittee bring back the two options. One, the paragraph form, where we had spent quite a bit of time wordsmithing and putting a lot of the same information from the guiding characteristics, and the one that had some of the revisions that we had talked about, and still with those guiding characteristics, that list of things. So we asked for two things to come.
Okay,
back.
that's helpful. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, David. I don't think I see any other hands raised.
And no other hands. And then just for the record, I'll note that Carol Singer is now present.
Great. Carol, welcome.
Thank you. Sorry
Good
to be late.
Good to see you. So we are going to start on the third section of the housing element, which relates to opportunity sites in RENA. And I think as much as we found the first two, something that led to a lot of thought, I'm sure we'll get even more so into that vein on this effort. So this is the first session of 3 relating to opportunity sites in RENA. And I sent out a note before the meeting to the group, kind of thinking that this is a chance for us to catch up on the big effort we all went through back in the spring and into early summer. So there's a bit of a refresher here on what are we talking about? We talk about opportunity sites, housing typologies, and so on. And I want to give a shout out to Mike Kim for working with staff on this upcoming presentation here. So there's some sort of issues that we'll talk through. There's great materials that staff prepared. One is this sort of gigantic spreadsheet with all the opportunity sites identified by the staff, members of the committee, citizens at large, color-coded, which we'll get into in a bit here. And there is a spreadsheet that hopefully folks had a chance to play with a bit. We got a nice video from Greg Wolf to explain how to work it. And so that's something that's sort of really more just to give people a feeling for what happens if you, let's say, zero out housing on the BART site, for example. What does that do in terms of meeting the balance of RENA? So that's more of a tool to play with. I understand we'll refine that further it's not meant to be definitive. Like, this is not the state of the world that's going to exist when we make a recommendation to planning by any means. It's just more a tool for us to get kind of our hands into the effort and understand it better. There are some things that we'll probably likely touch on tonight, but frankly, I think in terms of any kind of decision making, we'll defer to the next meeting or two. For example, the BART site, the De Silva site, terraces, and so on. I don't see us getting into deciding anything on those tonight. We may talk about it, which is great, but the idea was that we're going to really try to get reacquainted here, try to understand things, and set ourselves up to have a really thoughtful, informed conversation next week about maybe what we might want to include or not. So that was the thought there. I think we will talk a bit about the spreadsheet and maybe whether we've got the green, yellow, orange, red coding. I think maybe we can make some decisions, perhaps, at least with respect to red. We could talk about the other two, the yellow and orange a bit. But again, I kind of think that the key part of like site identification may well happen in the next meeting. So that's kind of a long-winded preface. And with that, unless there's any question, I'd like to turn this over to staff. I think Renata, you're leading us off, or maybe Diana, to walk us through this presentation.
Neither. I think it's Sarah.
I'll start tonight, but you'll hear from everyone. Don't worry.
I got 2 out of 3 wrong. Sorry about that, Sarah.
It's okay. So as Jim mentioned, we're here to talk about section 3 of our housing element, the sites inventory. So tonight we're going to go over the timeline that we have, our 3 meetings. We're going to talk about sort of the opportunity sites as a refresher, since we have reviewed some of this in the past. We'll talk about the site selection process, how we got to the list that we did. We'll talk a little bit about the Excel workbook that we want you to work through between now and next meeting. And then also talk about building typologies, density, and cost of development. So as Jim mentioned, we have 3 meetings outlined and scheduled to go over these sites, opportunity sites, to choose the inventory in order to give a recommendation to Planning Commission, who will then review it and give it a recommendation to City Council. So there's still lots more contemplation that will go into this, but today we're hoping to go over background mostly, and then do site selection next week, and then do a final vote on March 1st. But obviously we'll talk about the sites at each and every meeting. So again, this meeting, background information, asking questions, getting familiar with the topic again. Hoping to come around to some consensus around the green, orange, and red sites, most of them. As Jim mentioned, there are some large sites in there like BART and De Silva that might need a little bit more discussion at the next meeting, but some general consensus around those topics, or those color-coded sites. Meeting number 2, again, answering any questions, discussing the opportunity sites, because since you'll have after this evening, we wanted to give you the information well in advance, but so you do have the workbook already, but we'll go over it again this evening, so you know exactly how to use it and what to do with it. And then you can come back in the next meeting to more prepared to talk about the yellow site specifically. And then in meeting 3, hopefully we'll vote on the final inventory and forward recommendation to Planning Commission. So the site inventory is a parcel-specific listing of properties that are considered feasible for development. This is something we need to submit to HCD, and it has a bunch of information on it, including the specific sites, the zoning that's allowed, the parcel size, the existing uses, etc. And then whether or not there's planned or existing infrastructure. And then it also includes a map of the sites as well. So what is an opportunity site? It's a specific site that's suitable for residential development. It isn't required to be redeveloped, but it allows for it to be. It's an area planning for development, not necessarily mandating it. It needs to be of a sufficient size to accommodate RHNA, both in total and by income category. So the total opportunity sites need to allow for the correct amount of units we've been allocated, as well as a buffer in order to comply with the no knock-off provisions. Meaning if something gets redeveloped with something other than a low-income unit, then we need to be able to accommodate that somewhere else. And we'll get into that a little bit later as well. And then sites that require rezoning can be included in the inventory. but we cannot spot zone. So again, we have to sort of rezone a larger area, not just a specific parcel. So again, as a refresher, the opportunity sites should be located within the CEQA study areas, and these areas were designated by City Council in April of 2021. And you'll notice, so there are areas listed. These are, we call them planning areas. So they're listed 1 through 9 and then 13. There are a couple of missing, and that's because Council removed those from the study. So the number and size of sites that we end up identifying will determine the ultimate densities needed, right? So the fewer sites or the smaller sites, the more dense, the higher density may be required. Allowable densities are actually established in the land use element of the general plan, but this housing element will inform that ultimately. So GPAC can use the Excel workbook to adjust those densities and include or not include certain sites and see what happens with the total allocation. And again, we'll go over that in detail later in this presentation. And then we'll also go over the building typologies, which will help you identify what sort of those trade-offs and decisions mean. So if you increase the density in one area, what does that construction type look like? Now I'm going to turn it over to Diana to talk about site selection process.
Great. So we have come up with a draft opportunity sites list, and this included input from the community with 194 sites recommended or nominated. And so some of those were duplicates of, multiple people identified the same site, or we also had a list that the city staff had put together. But there were 194 discrete nominations that we got online. And in our development of the opportunity sites list, we have to take in consideration the feedback from HCD. We met with HCD several months ago about the state agency, specifically about, we have this kind of site. What do you think it would what is required in order to make this an opportunity site? What kind of analysis do we have to provide? And then lastly, we identified sites that we had had from the previous housing element that we've reused. And we can talk more about that later. So the state criteria helps us assess the realistic redevelopment feasibility. And this includes parcel size, existing land uses and whether those are underperforming or performing well, proximity to goods and services, access to transit, environmental constraints, and other analyses that show redevelopment of similar sites. So for example, we'll talk a little bit more about this, Corporate Terrace is an office development that has been designated or now going to be redeveloped with housing. So if we have had that experience, we can include that in our rationale for including other sites. And the note there is to refer to the activity sheet from the workshop for remembrance of how we went through this exercise. In terms of the HCD feedback we received, basically, they really want us to, explain how every site individually has analyzed the condition of the site, the age of it, existing leases, underperforming uses. If a project,
Diane,
yeah,
I don't know if this is right. Could you explain what the definition of underperforming is?
well, typically, underperforming is basically a use that may be not necessarily the highest and best use of a site. For example, and I'll just share this, and it's not a judgment, but like in Lafayette, maybe a thrift store is not the highest and best use of a particular space. It may be in another location like Antioch, where there are a number of sites that have lots of people going into thrift stores to buy things, but it's a use that basically doesn't have a lot of traffic, that may not have a lot of, we can think of it in terms of may not have a lot of ongoing, like there may be times when it's closed, those kinds of things. These are the things that we would consider underperforming in the sense that maybe there's a better use for this particular site. So in terms of the HCD feedback, they also wanted to know about whether if a developer has expressed interest in developing a particular parcel or a series of parcels, we can include those sites, because that means that some developer has decided that that is a project that they might want to pursue. In terms of things like national change for fast food restaurants and gas stations, the feedback from HCD is this will be very difficult to justify turning over a McDonald's or a gas station or a Chevron station or a Shell station or whatever, because of the difficulty in working with a national corporate interest. And unless the city has experience of working with these kinds of national chains to redevelop property, their recommendation is not include them in an inventory. Now, I mentioned before, offices into housing. This is a trend in the Bay Area generally, where office developments are being turned into housing either through demolition and rebuilding, or actually in some cases, not demolition and like refurbishing for housing. Not so much popular in the East Bay, but certain places on the peninsula where that's true. Also with the HCD feedback, shopping malls in general, HCD has advised against including shopping malls unless the jurisdiction wants to do infill on parking areas. For example, there have been a number of opportunity sites nominated by the community that include, for example, McCullough's and Whole Foods and the strip between the two, and the state said no, that in essence, we would have to only be able to consider the sort of the parking lot for redevelopment, not for the actual developments or the retail uses themselves. And in fact, anytime there is a grocery store or some other use that the community needs, the state has said, do not consider those because those are community-wide needs. We also talked about small sites and lot consolidation, and that the issue about if there are a string of individual parcels with multiple owners, that those will be harder to justify. If there are 3 or 4 sites with 2 owners, that's different than 10 sites with 6 owners. Although economic analyses are okay to include, the state has no recommendation or requirement that we include specific economic analyses in order to justify sites. And lastly, we have examples from neighboring jurisdictions. If the city does not have its own experience with, say, developing multiple small sites with a bunch of underperforming, however defined, uses, but another jurisdiction nearby does, we can rely on that as somewhat in terms of developing our inventory. So we produced, and you've seen this once before, at least once before, I think, a list of all the community offered opportunity sites, and in conjunction with the city staff opportunity sites. And we were able to assess them according to these criteria that HCD provided. Green would be a low level of analysis. Justification would not mean, it would not be dramatic to have to provide a justification for them. For example, a completely vacant site, or there in specific, we were talking about one particular small development in Lafayette that was a vacant commercial use, and they said absolutely that's a green site. So the things that we want the GPAC to consider are the yellow sites. These are ones that require a greater level of analysis because we haven't done it before, but they have a substantial potential for redevelopment. And the not recommended to be included are sites that are orange, which would require a huge amount of analysis. And we don't necessarily have the experience, and we don't necessarily think that we have found anybody in neighboring jurisdictions who have that level of analysis to say, yeah, this is the kind of development we need. And the red is prohibited. These are sites that actually already have sizable numbers of units of housing on them. There was one or two that were in the East Bay Mud right-of-way, and therefore we can't include them in the inventory.
So Diana,
Yes.
if you could go back one slide, Sarah, thank you. So is one way to think about this sort of the probability of success with HCD?
Yes.
Red, obviously, it's like kind of a non-starter with them. Green, high probability, and then yellow and orange in between.
Right.
So I guess I'm thinking of this in terms of risk reward, I suppose. But if we included orange sites, the risk is that these may be ones that HCD just turns down.
Absolutely.
For the reasons stated.
Yeah.
Which means if we then chew into whatever the buffer is we come up with, the city's got to grapple all over again with this process.
Right.
Okay. So.
That's exactly right.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions for Dan on this point? Because kind of a meaningful one, I think. We'll have more questions for you later, Diane, I'm sure.
I'm sure you will.
Okay. Sorry.
It's okay. So what can count towards RENA? First, any project in the city that will receive its certificate of occupancy between July 1st, 2022 and June 30th, 2031, we can count that against RENA in the sense that we already know projects like the Brant. We can count that against our RENA allocation because we know it will not receive certificate of occupancy until after July 1st. So there are a bunch of those. Those are called pipeline projects in the spreadsheet. And those are ones that we are pretty convinced are going to happen after or July 1st or after. The pipeline projects is basically the same category of those units. The BART we can count it against the RENA allocation if we make a determined statement to BART that we are interested in letting this development happen if it happens between now and 2031. Right now, we're not on that list, but we can go to BART and say, yes, we want to be included. We haven't said that. We can account estimated ADUs based on prior performance, how many units per year in the last 3 or 4 years, average that, and then multiply it against the 8-year cycle. Scattered sites, these are single family homes primarily, we can include those. SB9 units, right now, according to the state, they do not have a rationale or methodology to include any SB9 units, how to consider the reliable number of units that could be produced through SB9 lot splits and or site splits. So right now we're not counting those. And in fact, I was on a call, I don't know, last week, maybe sometime, where the state said, we don't know, and we're not sure when we'll know. So right now we can't count them. Next slide.
Oh, can I ask a question?
Yes.
What the pipeline units? Oh, when does that start? When they've been approved, or when does that count start? That it's in a pipeline.
They're projects that have been permitted, essentially.
Permitted.
Yeah.
Okay, but how do you not double count if they're permitted, and they start right away?
Right.
Certificate of occupancy.
This is one of the beauties of state housing law, is that we can count it against the RENA allocation going forward, and we can count it against production going backwards.
Oh, okay.
So something, excuse me.
Don, please go ahead.
So something like the terraces can be counted going forward? Is that?
Yes.
Well, we'll talk about terraces in more detail.
Yeah, no, I
next
realize
meeting.
that we're coming to it.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about the buffer. And the buffer, you received in your packet of information something from ABAG that explains the buffer and why it's needed. And basically putting it out there is that units above the RENA allocation itself are needed to ensure ongoing compliance with the no loss provisions of state housing law. And that includes by income category. So if a site is developed with commercial that we identified in the inventory should be housing, whatever units we calculated for that site, we have to make sure that there's enough capacity still left in the inventory to accommodate those units that were taken out because it's developed with commercial. Same with less than expected capacity. For example, we have, based on actual production and approvals, that we know that most developments, or the average development, is approved at 85% of zone capacity. So if it's 100, let's say one acre site with 100 DU per acre zoning, we can say with surety that 85 units will be built on that site. But if a developer comes in and says, I'm only going to put 20 units on that site, we have to make sure that the 65 units that we identify but are not going to be built have to be accommodated in the remaining inventory. And lastly, if a site we identified has a mix of affordable units, but it goes all as above mod, we have to make sure that all the affordable units can still be accommodated in the inventory. This is why we need to have a solid buffer that will really help us in case and when sites turn either over to commercial or to some higher income mix. And because our income mix is very heavily weighted towards lower income, we really need to know for sure that we have enough capacity to accommodate those units.
Okay, Diana?
Yes.
Two hands up, Mike Kim and then Susie Kelly.
Yeah, Diana, on the example where a site is zoned residential, but it converts to commercial, therefore we need to accommodate the loss of those in a buffer basket. That would entail a rezone and a general plan amendment, which is discretionary. So couldn't the council say, we will not rezone and GPA this site because we've got it allocated for residential and residential only?
Well, I think that there are a couple things at play here. One is that can the site go for residential or commercial? Let's say a site can be either. It's in a commercial district, it could be commercial or residential. And in the inventory, if we said it's going to be residential, and then it is, actually developed with commercial, then as long as we have enough buffer left in the inventory that would accommodate those units that were lost, we don't have to rezone. We only have to rezone if we come up short and there are not enough sites left to accommodate the RENA allocation by income category. And that's why we want to have this buffer that's big enough so we can sort of hedge our bets and make sure that we don't have to go back and rezone anything.
Yeah, I think I follow, and I think that, but I was asking the reverse of that, which is when we update the housing element, it's effectively a upzone, rezone of the general plan where we designate housing and its requisite densities. Mm-hmm. So on those parcels, if a commercial developer were to come in and submit an application, their application would be requesting a general plan amendment and a rezone, which the city council can deny.
Yes, yeah, I agree.
Your other example, I think,
city council could deny it.
I can see those.
Sure. Absolutely. Sorry, I misunderstood. Thanks, Mike.
Okay, Susie?
Thanks. My question is about the sites, if they're identified maybe as mixed use residential, is there a priority given to developers who are coming in, say, with low income housing? And on the flip side of that, are the residents in any way, do they have a say of what type of housing they would want? So if the units are approved, okay, there can be 35 units on these lots. Do the neighborhoods that are already there get to say, well, we'd like mixed use, or we would like this? Or is that entirely up to the developer and then the city to decide? And what if the developers are coming in and say, oh, I want to do low income housing? Are they given priority over somebody who wants to do mixed use? Or
Well,
high-end housing? which
From
would,
the
of course-
city standpoint, there's not a priority, but from the state standpoint, if somebody comes in with lower income housing, a proposal, there are certain things on various laws that get, activated.
Right.
And so the city would have to comply with those laws. It's not necessarily that the city would prefer one or the other. The city will look at every proposal and determine on its merits what needs to be done. But the actual, development of a project depends on a lot of factors, some of which the city has control over and many of which the city does not have control over.
Right.
Because more generally, I would say that the zoning is sort of the city's preference for what we would like to see there.
Okay,
but
so you are taking that
Right.
into consideration.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
like that's on the policy level, but we essentially wait for a developer to come in and present a proposal,
Okay,
and then we react to that.
okay, thank you.
Any other questions on the buffer topic from members of the committee? I think, Diana, if I could, I think this is in the materials, I think you touched on this, but the buffer also relates to the different income categories too.
Right.
Is that,
Yes.
because and this is helpful for me, I had thought of the buffer as like a single percentage applied to the total. The point here is it's really being applied to these different categories. Is that a fair way to look at it?
Well, yes, you can have sort of the way the spreadsheet works, the workbook that we put together, really would allow you to change densities, and the income categories would like filter out in a responding way. The thing is that some sites could be used for lower income, and some sites can't, especially small sites cannot be used for lower income. And so when you do the math, you end up with, it might be, the buffer might be 47% for all of Lafayette in total, but 90% at above moderate income and only 3% at very low income, or 10% at low income. So we have to look at, when we do these math calculations, where will we get the best bang for our buck to ensure that we have enough buffer in the lower income categories. Because if a site goes that we thought might have lower income units in it and it doesn't go for that, we have to find it somewhere else. And that's the sort of mathematical problem that we're faced with.
It's sort of a multivariate equation, as
Right.
it were. And it's a more complex math problem than I think
Yes.
I thought it was earlier. Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions on the buffer topic here? And I know we're going to come back to this, but okay, Dana, thank you.
I think there's a couple more slides on the buffer, and then we'll move on. I'm happy to take these, Diana, if you want, or are you muted?
Sorry. Yes, I'm muted. It has to be somebody. It might as well be me. So the fifth cycle, we only had 400 units to accommodate. And so now we have 2,100 units to accommodate. So the fifth cycle had basically 100% buffer. We had 400 units of RENA and 392 units of buffer. And because of historic underproduction of very low income and low income, you can see in this, it didn't matter in the 5th cycle whether or not we had a buffer that would accommodate the lower income units. We now do have a need to accommodate, make sure that there is a significant buffer for low and very low. Next slide.
Diana,
Yes.
I'm sorry. And if you could go back to the slide, please, Sarah. And the reason is there was a change in the statute in
Yes.
that regard. So that was something in your material. So
Right.
this is the world we live in now as opposed to the one we lived in for the 5th cycle.
Exactly. The world we live in now is you have to have enough units in the inventory to accommodate future changes, even if by income category, even if everything goes to above mod, we have to make sure that there's still enough for very low and low. It didn't used to be that. It used to be we had 400 units and we had a buffer of 392 units. And even if 800 units were developed and they were all above mod, it wouldn't matter. Now it matters.
Okay. And then one last clarification. We did well with respect to entitled versus the RENA in the aggregate, which is an argument I think I made in the narrative summary edits.
Right.
But check me on this, are the terraces in the entitled number? Does anyone know?
I don't know. I would have to ask Sarah.
Yeah. I violated my rule of not getting a question to staff beforehand, so my apologies on that, staff. But I think that's the case because it is entitled, but maybe we could just confirm that later on. Thank you.
I believe that is the case, yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
So in terms of the buffer, what do we have to consider? The size of the lower income allocation, i.e. if it's like 10 units, then we don't have to worry. But if it's like 1,000 units, which it is, we need to worry about that. Sites that cannot be counted towards affordable, including sites that are less than a half an acre. Basically, unless the city has had experience with developing half acre or smaller sites for affordable, we cannot include them as all affordable units or all affordable sites. And lastly, on the factors is the methodology for distributing affordable units throughout the inventory. Like, are we going to do it? And the way we have done it is based on what is the allocation from the RENA allocation. Like the RENA says 25% in very low and 20% in low, et cetera, et cetera. We've done that. It's a mathematical process. It's a mathematical effort. It does not mean that any particular site will have affordable units on them. It's simply to demonstrate that we have enough capacity, if those units are developed, that we can accommodate it. So that's what bullet number 2 means. And we also look at things like there are more constraints, for example, that suit affordable housing. We need more backup sites that meet the criteria, i.e. we need sites that we can essentially make sure that if they don't go for affordable, then we need to make sure that there are enough left in the inventory, as I said. And the state has recommended a buffer of at least 15 to 30%, but that was based on the total inventory. I think that we need a buffer of that size by income category, at least 15 to 30% for low and very low. The state has made it clear that moderate and above moderate is less of concern to them than the very low and low income buffer. Are you going to talk about this now?
Renata is.
Yay!
Thanks, Anna. So included in the staff report and available online for anybody interested is an Excel workbook. So this is an interactive workbook that GPAC members and the public alike can use to understand the impact that different green and yellow or color-coded green and yellow sites would have on us meeting and accommodating our RENA allocation. So we'll do a little demo of the workbook itself after we finish this presentation, and we can answer any questions about it for if anyone has had a chance to kind of play with the tool. So I won't go into the specifics of it right now, but if we can go to the next slide, we just want to provide a little bit of context on how you might use this. So based on the significant amount of public feedback that we've been getting, all the workshops we've been holding, there's a couple key themes that we've been hearing. And we figured as the GPAC is working through choosing opportunity sites, it might be helpful to kind of have some framing of different options or scenarios of what might be included or excluded and how that might affect our opportunity site selection. So these are by no means static. These are just for reference for GPAC to consider and kind of use as you're going through the workbook to, include this part, exclude that part, and you'll see that these different sites or different even map areas, so the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, or 13 will have varying impacts. And that's something that we saw in the Balancing Act simulation that we did last spring. So this is just a different iteration with a little bit more specifics on the sites, including their area for you to use. So just as demonstration, so those scenarios shown on the previous slide, this is how they play out in that workbook. So keeping all the densities the same as they are now, just for consistency, this is kind of the range that you see as the result. So you can see in the downtown A, we're short on our very low income and low income. Downtown B, we're only short on our very low income. And then next slide, please.
Hold on, go back if you could, please, Renata. Let's take downtown A for a second. The way you did it, and I know it's just for illustrative purposes, we can do anything we want. That only got to, that got to 1834. Okay, so the only way we have to come up with 2,116, I believe is the number. I'm doing this from memory. So in that downtown A scenario, if I was playing with that, I would have to increase the density in different areas to get it to go up to 2,116. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And it may or may not provide an effective buffer. That's the other question I would have to ask. So if we're doing this, as we're playing around with it and coming up with our formation of our opinions, it always has to add up to 2,116 plus a buffer. And the way you do that is either include areas and or increase density. Those are the two variables. Am I thinking about this the correct way?
Yes. And so
downtown A, although it's a scenario, the way you did it isn't acceptable because we'd have to change the density to make it acceptable to the state.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Just wanted to clarify that.
And I see, Carol, you've got your hand up on this.
Yes, following up on what Matt just said. So if you change the density at other areas, and you're working on the worksheet, excuse me, can you just change the densities? Don't you have to look at all the other factors that, height or just as an example, maybe the site soils and everything wouldn't hold a building with 4 more stories on it. So are we supposed to consider all the other criteria when we move it around, or we just move it around? The figures.
Yes, so we provided the workshop 4 activity sheet, which we went through last spring, which outlines the state's criteria for these sites. And so we included that in the packet for your reference. We also are going to have a presentation later tonight by Mike Kim to kind of provide some context on different building densities and heights that you can also, we'll provide these PowerPoint slides for you, so you can reference that too. So in addition to public input, the state's criteria, and that's included in that activity sheet from the workshop last spring, and also this information you're going to get on building typologies, you should be considering that. And we'll kind of talk through in a few slides what we're looking for you all to do. So if we can close out this portion, I think we might answer some questions.
And thank you, Carol. And if I could ask just a quick question, with respect to the downtown B, which includes BART, that's at the density level in AB 2923, right? That's
Correct.
75
Yeah.
per acre, I think. Okay, thank you.
Yes, so that would be a minimum requirement of 75 dwelling units to acre. Okay, and then next slide, please, Sarah. So, and then this is the second two, where it's a more distributed concept, but again, including and excluding some different sites. And you can see again how, there's a huge surplus in distributed scenario B, but maybe we don't want to just include everything wholesale. Maybe we want to kind of focus density or development in certain areas. So that's the challenge at hand for GPAC to work through in the next few meetings, is taking that all in. So we've given you this workshop or this workbook. We've given you some resources. We're going to give you some more information on what density is and means and how it's all balanced. As you're going through this workbook, we are asking GPAC members to think through why they are including or excluding a site. We are looking for GPAC members to come to the next meeting with recommendations for particular sites on whether you feel they need to be included or excluded and why. And kind of thinking through those trade-offs that Carol brought up, right? So we might include a site, but it might require us to go to a higher density overall. Is that preferable over alternatives? And so we'll provide some more specific framing for how to think through that ahead of the next meeting, but we encourage you all to start playing with the workbook, getting familiar with it, so we can talk through it. Additionally, we're working with our environmental consultant to prepare some kind of generalized massing visualizations. So you can see kind of building forms, generalized building forms at different densities, kind of based on these scenarios. So those more distributed ones versus more concentrated development. I see Carol, do you have a question?
Yes, when you're moving them around, excuse me, I've got a frog in my throat. Is there any recommendation as to the size, how big the size has to be to avoid spot zoning? In other words, if you have 5 sites put together on the map and you take one site away for some reason, I mean, how far down can you go? Is it 1 acre, or I missed it somewhere?
Sarah, will you go back to the first slide with the workbook, please? There, thank you. So it might be a little hard to read, but on the left is where you're deciding to include or exclude specific sites. On the right is where you're sent, the blue cells on the right is where you're setting the densities for areas. And so you're not going to be adjusting and I'll show a demonstration later, but when you change a blue cell for the density, it'll change it for that whole CEQA planning area. So we avoid spot zoning. So GPAC members will not be rezoning specific parcels because that would be spot zoning.
So Carol, that third column over references the planning area number. And so like in this one, it says 13 all the way down here. All of these sites are in area 13, and you can only adjust this blue, the blue item, and it will adjust all of the densities for all of the parcels in that area. So
thank you. Okay.
Okay. And this is a slide that you saw early last year, and it's just a refresher to tee up Mike Kim. So we went through that presentation previously of what all goes into that development process, and want to remind you kind of to Susie's question earlier of, you know, their zoning and those kind of development standards are the things that are in the city's control, but there's so many other factors that go into actual development happening. So there's kind of what the market is willing to pay and accept. You know, if there's a high vacancy rate, not likely that someone's going to want to build in a certain area because no one's moving there, right? Also the cost of land, the carrying cost of land, so all those taxes, all the maintenance that might go into it, the rents that they can get, how much it costs in fees to offset development in a particular area. All of these things play into what gets built. And with that, I think I'll kick it over to Mike to give more specifics on how specific building typologies get built and what they mean for our built environment.
Thanks. So just to give you one example of what Renata was saying, today in the Bay Area, where we have 101 distinct cities, only about 15 to 20 cities is a mid-rise apartment building economically feasible today. That's because the construction costs are so high today for various reasons, inflation, supply chain issues, etc., that only about 15 to 20 cities could you even economically make sense of building a mid-rise apartment building. If you got the land for zero today, which is impossible, that would increase to about 25 cities. So that gives you a sense of the economic factors that are global concerns that affect what can be built and what cannot be built. I'm going to run through the few slides here, and really the objective is for my fellow members here to just get a sense of, and I've got a cheat sheet at the end that you can have in your hip pocket to get a sense of what density and what height, because that's what we're ultimately concerned about, right? If I say 35 to the acre, what kind of massing are we talking about, right, in a different neighborhood? And effectively, there's the following types of housing products, and there aren't very many more outside of this. So the first is single family, which is obvious. Let's go to the next slide. Oh, I'm sorry, there's just a couple of housekeeping. So all the cost estimates that you're going to see is based on a regional or national builder that has purchasing scale. So if you buy 1 million light bulbs versus 10 light bulbs, the guy who buys 1 million light bulbs can get a massive discount because of scale. So I based that number on a regional or national who's got a purchasing economies of power. And then the estimates are for construction costs only, doesn't include the land or the impact fees or the carry costs, various other costs. And as a general rule, in a project, about 60% of the cost is construction. 40% is everything else, as a general rule, okay? And then all costs are shown in net saleable or net rentable square foot. Okay, all right, so here we go. Single family. So the density is 1 to 10 dwelling units to the acre. You might say, wow, 10 to the acre, is that really possible? Bottom left is a project on Moraga Road, and that's 11 housing units on 1 acre. And it will look something like upper right, where you have a fee simple ownership, but it's a multi-story single family home. Okay, next slide. Garden apartments, the density is about 20 to 25 units to the acre. They're generally 2 to 3 stories. And the way they're parked is in a carport or in the surface. So like bottom right shows you a 3-story version with surface parking. The image above that are 2-story units with carports behind it. An image to the bottom left, you've got tucked parking, and they're a mix of 2 and 3 different story apartment buildings. It's really important.
And Mike, when you say tucked parking, that means it's like underneath, underground?
Yeah, so yes, exactly. So like a concrete structure, or, hidden away, as it were. The next product is townhomes. You'll notice it's very similar in density, but if you were paying attention to all the bullet points, you'll notice the costs are higher, even though it's the same type of wood frame construction, 3 stories as the garden type. But the reason why this stuff is more expensive is because this is a for sale product. You have to have a higher level of finishes, like Viking, appliances versus, Frigidaire or something like that. Higher quality of everything. So just generally costs more. But the density is about the same, 18 to 25 dwelling units to the acre. And this is what you call a 3-story tuck under. The bottom right image, you see the garage. So the garage is tucked underneath the house. And in the image above it is the front of the house, where you've got the front door element, and they're just physically attached side by side townhomes. And the bottom left is an image is a different architectural design that is not typical of these 3-story tuck under townhomes, but you can make it look, different ways. All right, next slide. Stacked flats are basically units that are stacked on top of one another. So the Woodbury, the upper level is a unit, the middle level is yet another unit, condominium unit, and the lower level is yet another unit. So you can stack them up, generally 4 stories. You could push to 5, but they're generally 4 stories. And the density range is 25 to 35 to the acre. Next slide. Low rise is what we mean by low rise is what we call 3/1. 1 is a concrete level parking. So bottom left, you can see the project here in downtown, where you can make out the garage, the white part, and that's a concrete parking deck. And then above it are wood frame, 3 levels of wood frame housing construction. And the general densities are 45 to 60 to the acre. And in a town like Lafayette, it would bias towards the lower density, 45. The reason why, across all of these products that I'm presenting, the reason why is because one of the main drivers of Lafayette is our schools. Therefore, kids, therefore 2 bedrooms and 3 bedrooms, as opposed to studios and 1 bedroom. So we would tend to bias in Lafayette towards the lower density. And in, call it downtown Oakland or something like that, you would bias near transit, you would bias towards the higher density range, because there would be more studios and 1 bedrooms, given the fact that households would be singles and couples and roommates, working professional types. Height of these guys are 45 feet, and the costs are what they are. Okay, next slide. When we say mid-rise, what we're talking about is generally a 4/2, 2 levels of concrete deck, 4 levels of wood frame construction, hitting a pretty impressive density of 80 to 120. Now, the image to the bottom left, that's an example of, on the left-hand side, a 3/1, and on the right-hand side, a 5/2, I think it is. So you can actually do 5 levels of wood frame over 2 or 3 levels of concrete. But as a general proposition, 4/2 is what we would consider mid-rise housing. And the the BART station lots would generally fit into this category, because we have to do minimum 75 to the acre. Again, because we're Lafayette, we would bias towards the lower density, given the main attractiveness here are our school districts. So developers know that they're going to want to build more 2 bedrooms and 3 bedrooms. Therefore, most of the housing that would go on the BART station lot would be mid-rise podium housing. The parking is all underneath in that 2 levels of concrete deck, and they would not be spilling out, as it were. So we just have to make sure that we provide enough parking requirements to ensure that that's the case. Okay, next slide. High-rise housing is obviously something that we will probably not see here, but just to round out the different typologies, we threw it out there. The project on the bottom left was my project in San Francisco, and that would constitute probably the shortest high-rise, which is about 100 feet tall. The one in the middle was my project in downtown San Jose, and that's a bona fide high-rise at 230 feet, I think it was. So you can get, virtually, in theory, unlimited density, right? Like 200 to the acre. My project in San Jose, the one in the middle, I think that achieved like 275 dwelling units to the acre. Okay, next slide. This wasn't my takeaway slide. Go to the next one. Cheat sheet. Okay. So this is the one sheet that everybody should probably have with them as they go through the opportunity zone sites, and just say, okay, here are the different product types, and here's the density range, and here's the kind of like correlating height of the building, and this is how they're gonna have to park it, right? That's it. Any questions?
I see one hand up for Susie. Please go for it.
So of course, I'm very happy to see parking's been addressed and that seems really well thought out. I love the different options. I think the buildings are beautiful, actually, and even being a downtown person, knowing that some of these would be around me, it looks a lot less scary to see them the way that they are. Looking that, they don't look like, I don't like the high rises, but it doesn't sound like those will be here. One thing I've liked with the ones so far is it seems like they've added in a lot of trails and other things that actually complement the community that we're already in. So I would just like to say kudos on that. It's good that we seem to be moving towards that, because I know it's scary, the idea of adding more housing. But I think it's just the traffic and the parking, if that's addressed, then we'll be able to accommodate it.
Yeah.
I got Matt and then Dawn.
Thanks, Jim. I guess this question is both to staff and to Mike. I had some discussions in email with the staff and also with Diana, and she provided me quite a bit of information on micro units. And these are loosely defined as, from a square footage, very small apartments, small studios, I guess is the best phrase I could have. And in a multi-story apartment that's entitled or has a density bonus because they're adding low income, these micro units may be a way, if developers would do this and the city would encourage it, to have more units available that would be at a lower price. I know that it's about 25% lower from a material standpoint, but my question is it feasible to consider that to help us on the very low and low income is doing more micro units? I'm not sure we've ever done those. So I guess that question goes to staff and to Mike.
Yeah, and the general proposition, Matt. So that the industry language for that is called affordable by design, where you design in affordability by either going small or doing modular or what have you.
Right.
There's almost no market for micro units in Lafayette, because again, the demand drivers are schools primarily, really, and then secondarily the amenities in the area, but mainly it's the schools. And so it's going to be families that are most attracted to living in Lafayette, which will necessitate multi-bedroom type products. There may be an argument that could be made for senior housing for micro units. That's something that I think is worth understanding better. But just in terms of new families, working professionals, generally not. I mean, generally working professional singles live in San Francisco, and then when they get married and decide to have kids, then they go to Marin County or La Miranda, right? But they're really coming because their household formation is changing.
So staff, has there been any discussion with developers about micro units? And does that, what Mike's saying, make sense?
There's not been any discussion about micro units, but I will say the inclusionary housing regulations do require a similar type of unit that's of the regular above moderate income units. So if you primarily have 1 and 2 bedroom units, then the inclusionary requirement requires you to have that same mix of 1 and 2 bedroom units for the low income as well. But I think you're maybe thinking above and beyond that as like just creating more more smaller units for the affordability by design.
But it sounds like we've never had those kind of discussions.
Examples where it actually made sense in the Bay Area is in Berkeley for student housing and urban core San Francisco, like CBD, not even the outskirts of CBD. Outside of that, it has not proven to be successful.
Okay, thank you, Mike. And staff.
Got Don and then Christine.
My question, you gave the various numbers from $350 to about $850 a square foot for construction. Is that in effect just the construction cost, or is that the sale?
Yeah, that's just the construction cost. So the way to think about it, Don, is just use an average unit size to keep it simple, 1,000 square feet. So
Right.
$850,000 construction price, and then you add about 40% more to that for everything else, land, design. So you're to build one high-rise unit at 1,000 square feet will cost about $1.3 million.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I'm finding as I look at just houses for sale right now. Everything works out to be approximately $1,000 a square foot, but that's the sale price, which consists of both halves as you just described.
Yeah.
What about, has anybody looked into co-housing? I'm going to check that out later this week in Alameda, but I'm just wondering if you have seen anything like that.
Yeah, co-housing fell out of fashion intensely through the COVID period. People didn't want to live with strangers in such close proximity. Prior to that, it was struggling getting traction just because it's an entirely different communal style of living where you share common areas. Only thing you have private is bedroom and bathroom, but everything else is shared. So again, in different parts of the universe, like in Paris and in Stockholm, these things work a little bit better. It hasn't really caught on here in the Bay Area as of yet. Post-pandemic, it may. Again, similarly, why the micro units would not be desirous here in Lafayette. Similarly, co-housing, it really wouldn't be a market for it. Like nobody would want to come here and co-house.
No, I see it as a senior option.
I see. Okay, yeah, that different discussion. I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, we got Christine and Matt, you had your hand up, but okay,
No,
Christine.
Sorry.
Hi, I was kind of going to talk about what Don's talking about, these micro units. I thought we were trying to be inclusive for everyone, which would include our seniors. So I don't know if focusing on just families is exactly the direction we should be thinking here. So I know it seems to be family heavy, but I don't believe that's really the case because I know there are a lot of people who would like to age in place, and that's sort of what we had talked about earlier. So, I mean, if we look at the fair housing, wouldn't the micro units be okay for that? I guess I just don't understand if you've got in a very expensive building, mostly 2-3 bedroom units, and you do have some smaller units, micro units or just 1 bedrooms that would be very appropriate for someone downsizing. Why can't that be accepted by HCD or the affirmative fair housing?
Well, I can't answer for the HCD what they will or will not allow, but what I'm suggesting is that a developer will look at the market study in Lafayette and quickly conclude that there is not a robust demand for micro units in this town. Now, there may be on the margins. It's like if I built a 100-unit project, I may be okay building 5 micro units, but not much more than that because I wouldn't see a market demand for it.
Yep, I agree.
So basically,
there are other ways to like create units for seniors and other people who are, single family, like small units and so forth. So, yeah.
Like, do you have a sense of if there were a micro unit building of the density and height of that? It sounds like it's not necessarily something a developer would choose to do, but it's not something we need to preclude, right?
Yeah, you
wouldn't
don't get
there-
precluded. And so like Patrick Kennedy does a lot of these micro units, and I've walked his product, which is literally 250 square foot units. 250 to like 300 square foot units. And I'd have to think about the density, but it's pretty darn dense. You could pack a lot in for sure. But I just don't think there's a demand for it here, generally speaking, notwithstanding the senior segment. That's something that I don't know very well.
Okay.
One other thing to point out really quickly, guys, is as we go through this drill and plop down density on these plots, when you, again, because we're Lafayette, these density numbers will bias towards the lower density ranges. Bear that in mind. If we were to say 65 to the acre, a developer would be confused because he's going, I don't know what product that is. What am I building? Because it's not a low rise, it's not a mid rise. I'm just kind of stuck, So you want to try to stay within this density parameter as we go forward. And again, bias towards the lower density, just because that's the likelihood of what's going to get built.
Thank you, Mike. I've got a question, but are there any other questions that folks have for Mike, like on his part in the cheat sheet?
And this cheat sheet is available to us.
We'll make the slides available.
Yeah, you're making the slide of it. Good.
Yeah, and frankly, Mike, I love this cheat sheet. Thank you so much. It's very helpful. So I'm looking at this. I'm thinking, okay, right now, zoning of the downtown is 30 up to 35 per acre, which sort of fits that band of the sort of stacked flats band. I mean, that's sort of like the realm we're in right now. It kind of works.
By the way, Jim,
Yeah.
All the product typologies, stacked flats are the least built product because most people don't know how to do it. So just incidentally.
Okay. And I'm thinking of like, if we ended up saying, okay, well, to make all the numbers work, we've got increased density in some parts of the downtown from 35 to something. What you're saying is that the next step up would be that low rise range of 40 to 60. So like 50 is a number that would work for the market.
Yes.
Okay. 65, theoretically, you could do that, but that's betwixt and between these different product categories, right?
Especially in Lafayette, because people would say, okay, I want to do a low rise, but then I'm forced to do studios and one bedrooms, and there's not a robust market for that here.
Okay. And on the BART site, per AB 2923, the statute is 75 per acre, which is sort of right in the middle of low rise and mid rise. Is that?
Yeah, so they'll go mid rise on that, Jim. They'll do 4/2 because again, they'll do more 3 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms. Okay. So there's some elasticity to these density ranges, but it's just a rule of thumb for you to keep in mind.
Got it. Okay. So like if indeed BART played out, we're looking at the lower end of the mid rise range is what your typology would be. 4/2.
Exactly.
Okay, that's helpful. Sarah, I think this is we got.
Yep, we just wanted to say this is a session for you to ask questions, and hopefully we can gather some consensus around the green sites, the orange and red sites, including most of those and excluding most of those. And then in the next meeting, we will talk about kind of the big green sites and then also the yellow sites.
Okay. So. And so what I want to do is make sure, we're back. We have a chance to sort of ask questions, clarify things and so on. And then I think the protocol would be to go to any members of the public who'd like to add something on this topic area, bring it back to the GPAC for discussion. I think that would be the sequence. And so I see 2 hands up. I've got Matt first and then Carol.
Yeah. 2 questions regarding BART. If we were to permit BART to be developed, the law says 75 units per acre, but that could go higher with density bonuses that the developer is entitled to. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
I'm sorry, was that a yes?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Secondly, if we don't entitle or we don't ask to zone BART, that does not stop BART from doing something on those lots. Is that correct?
That's also correct. However, we have had discussions and they seem to not want to move forward without working with the city.
Thank you.
Okay. I got Carol.
Thank you. I just want to be sure we're going to get the cheat sheet, and that I'd like to get what can count towards arena.
Yep, the entire slideshow will be available for you.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, definitely want that cheat sheet. Any other questions or clarifications on what we've discussed so far? Don, I think I see your hand.
Yeah, I can't find my, so, okay. Anyway, my quick question, the one area that we keep referring to, De Silva's, is currently zoned 10 acres. So we're talking about rezoning lots of things too. Is that correct? Or we don't have the power of doing that. All we can do is say perhaps rezone. What's the status there?
So De Silva is one of the opportunity sites, so that would be of consideration, right? So if you wanted to rezone it in order to accommodate additional arena units, we could make that recommendation to Planning Commission. And
Well, I mean, that's the only way, based on what it is right now, that's the only way anything could change there, correct?
correct.
Yeah. And De Silva is one of the sites I think we'll talk more about in depth next
No,
week.
I understand that. I'm just, I see that's the only empty space right now that we have to talk about.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions, clarifications on this? What I think I'll do is I'm going to turn this to any comment, questions from the public. I think you just raise your hand there and Sarah will pull you in and we'll take it away, please.
Yep, if you would like to make a public comment, please use the raise your hand function at the bottom of your screen or *9 if you're calling in. David Clark has his hand raised and is in the meeting.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to make a comment on the buffer, but first, Mike, that was a fascinating presentation. Thanks very much. That clarified a lot for me anyway. But well, with respect to the buffer, I understood that we can't use spot zoning. I get that. But so this is sort of a, well, it's a question basically. I don't know the answer to this, but I'll put it in the form of a comment if I can. If we wind up in the situation where we're short in one of the income allocations, for example, and we otherwise would have to rezone, I'm wondering if at that point we can't use spot zoning up to arrive at the initial RENA numbers. I get that, but at that point, could we employ SB 10 to try to remedy some of those if there were shortfalls, as opposed to having to rezone entire areas? And I know SB 10 we've kind of ignored, walked away from, reached the conclusion that it's voluntary to begin with. It doesn't really impact us in Lafayette, so we've kind of put it on the back shelf. But I think SB 10 would allow us to do effectively spot zoning. But I'm wondering if there might be some utility for that way after the fact if we come up short on one of the allocations. Just toss that out there. But thank you.
Thank you, David. Good question. Is there a quick answer on that one?
The quick answer is yeah, for some higher level of income categories, but not very low and low. I think the very low and low would not be probably, and I can definitely put together something for this for the commission, but it's really about, SB 10 is like SB 9 in the sense that it's really addressing above moderate income and moderate income, but not very low and low.
Okay, that's helpful. Carol, I see your hand up, but we're in the public session.
I'm
right now.
sorry.
Is that okay? We'll come back. Great, Sarah. I think Colin Elliott's got his hand, or maybe others too.
I'm in the GPAC meeting.
One is in the meeting.
Okay.
Great, Colin, welcome.
Welcome. Let me try turning everything on. Wait, it's working. Perfect. Good evening, everyone. Gosh, there's a lot of stuff for you all to consider here for sure, and this is not an easy issue. So, as some of you know, I've been running my own model on this, thanks to Greg and Diana providing me with their base model about a year ago. So I've not had a chance to go through and compare yet, but I will do that. I did notice, Sarah, some cells are locked on your, in fact, most of it's locked except for certain things that you can change. I'm just wondering whether you can unlock certain things. A couple of things I want to bring your attention to. One is the yield. You guys haven't talked about yield yet, but I do think you should talk about that. Making assumptions based on historic yield. That may be something I think you need to look at, because I think more recent developments have been yielding much higher. So I think you have a 75 or 85% assumed yield in there. From what I'm hearing, it seems like you have at least 90% on the larger parcels, maybe certainly probably not in the smaller parcels. But that's something that I think you need to look at tweaking. I also want to make you think about the guidelines a little, and I thought that was helpful, the notes and what Diana went through on the feedback from the state. But they did actually give us some clues there. I do think that you mentioned that they really only want you to develop on the infill areas in the shopping centers, and I accept that the anchor space, and they specifically talk about that. So anchor space and the anchor parking areas such as Safeway, Whole Foods, it wouldn't be appropriate to develop there, but I do think you can look at developing the area in between, because in that particular Plaza shopping center, it's all one ownership. There's a bank pad at the front, you'd exclude that, but that's exactly the sort of area that I think you actually could include and could argue that back to the state. And I think the same you can say for La Fiesta Square. We know that's been on the market. We know that the owner of that is open to it being redeveloped. He's also open, I understand, to it being included in the inventory. So I think there are certain properties like that we'll need to take a look at. And I know that you're talking about experience, and is there experience in the city or nearby, but frankly, most cities going through this right now are in the same boat, where they're looking at it saying, we don't have any experience on this. There's just not a lot, right? Every city's been dumped with a level of units that's far beyond anything they've ever built before. So to do that, you've got to start to get creative. And I'm probably working on 4 or 5 shopping centers in the state, I think mostly down in Southern California, where the owners and the city are looking at exactly that, including them on the inventory, so that they can be developed what are currently sort of underutilized typical strip centers or bigger with large parking areas. And they're going through this saying, all right, we're going to keep the anchor space, we're going to keep this space. But this part over here, yeah, we could develop that. So I think those are some of the things that it's going to be tricky. I agree. You're going to have to get into the nuances on that, but I do think there are opportunities there. The other thing is, we talked about the buffer, and I think you've made some really good points on that. But what you didn't mention is, and I'd like to know if you can get the stats, is for the prior circle, how many of those units were developed on sites that weren't in the inventory? And my guess is a fairly large, substantial of them were developed on sites that weren't in the inventory. Thereby, you kind of have a buffer there, because there's always going to be sites developed that aren't in your inventory. So while you're worried that you have enough sites in your inventory, you're going to get sites developed that aren't there. And so those are going to give you the flex. I particularly think that's the case in the moderate and above moderate.
Sarah, time.
So I do think you can look at a much lower buffer on your, but certainly on your above moderate and your moderate.
Colin, I think you're over time.
No, I probably am, Diana.
Sorry.
I tend to speak a lot for sure. But anyway, I'll be looking at it more, and those are just some things to think about. Thank you.
Great, Colin, thank you very much. Let's see. I kind of think that we do want to touch on the points that Colin raised here. Maybe we get into this when we talk about, look at the bigger mapping and so on. We'll probably talk about buffer issues next week more, I think, in detail. Are there other, I think I see another hand. Oh, Stella, I think we have enough, someone else in the public. Is this relating to?
I have a question for the last speaker.
Oh,
okay.
Sorry about that. Let me bring Colin back in.
Go away.
I get Colin back.
Am I in, or did I get?
Rob, I'm sorry. We've got a follow-up question for Colin, then we'll get to you. My apologies.
I had a question. You mentioned yield, and I didn't know what that meant. Could you explain that?
Yeah, if you look on the spreadsheet, and you might need to bring that up, Renata or Sarah, over in columns U and V, there's a yield number, and what that is basically, and it says, hey, if you have a density of say 35 units per acre and you've got an acre, in theory you can put 35 units on that. Now in practice, back in the old days, because of setbacks, height limits, and other things, developers found they've rarely made that, and so you wouldn't build 35, you'd maybe build 30. So that difference is the yield. That has changed a lot with state density bonus and the density bonuses. So while we don't take that into account in the base numbers, because I understand density bonus isn't really allowed to be included in base, it is, from a practical point of view, something that affects yield. And therefore you can kind of look at the effect that that's having on what developers are actually building on sites.
Yes, that's correct. And that's why we're using 85% of maximum zone density.
Yeah, I noticed you'd come up from where you were. I was just trying to get you to come up some more. That's all.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Stella. Any other questions for Colin? So we can get Mr. Lavoie here. Colin, thank you very much. Rob, please go ahead.
Thank you. I have a concern about the over concern of trying to get the very low housing and making a large buffer to so that we can hit that number. And just for illustration, I calculated the required buffer that we would need for the prior RENA cycle, where we had 400 units required and 139 very low income housing units. We would have needed a buffer that would cover between 6,500 and 10,500 units to achieve that 138, if we're just assuming that it's mathematical. And I think, Mike Kim explained that some of these things just aren't particularly desirable in our community or economically possible. And so I really think that we got to figure out a way to get this thing to pass the RENA allocation without having this enormous buffer. I don't know if we need to, change the city law to encourage, these small units or something, but just making a big buffer isn't going to necessarily mean that we accomplish our goal. And so hopefully that illustration explains that. Let's see, my other comment was we're already allowed to do 52 units with density bonuses on the existing 35 unit zoning. So that fits right into the sweet spot of the low rise at 40 to 60 units. And Mike said that Lafayette would typically be in the 40 to 45 or 40 to 50 range. So to me, we've already got that kind of zoning permitted.
And so I don't see any reason that we need to increase the zoning to accomplish our goal here. I think that's it for now. Thank you.
Great. Rob, thank you very much. Actually,
any questions?
Rob, I have, based on what you asked, a follow-up maybe for Diana on the density bonus. And I'm actually glad you raised it. So Diana, my understanding is that even though we do have a density bonus, that for purposes of this exercise with RENA, HCD doesn't let us take that into account. Can you clarify that, please?
Correct. HCD it says that we can't include the density bonus in our analysis of development, but we can include historical analysis. So if, you know, that's what the 85% came out to, was really about the density bonus being applied and with actual development. So we can't say that, okay, this development is going to be 100 units and we get 20 more units on that for the density bonus, but rather that we had a development that said, you know, we're going to develop something at 80 units to the acre or 70 units to the acre, and then another 20 units on top of that. Does that make sense?
I think so. Rob, you asked the question. I want to make sure that you get the answer.
I think that that's what we need to do, is figure out some way to massage this model to make those very low income units work out while we're still not over densifying the city. And that sounds like maybe a solution. So, because you could put 10,000 units in there and not get your 138 very low income units. So I think we don't want to get hung up on that.
Okay. Thank you, Rob.
Thank you.
And just the follow on to that for me is, Diana, I think Colin touched on this earlier. You got this 85% yield. It was lower before, as I recall.
It was 70 or 77%, something like that in the last round, and now it's up to 85%. Yeah.
Because of you take into account more the impact of the density bonus. So
exactly.
And
it is 75 along Mount Diablo Boulevard, right? Because we want to make the commercial. Is that?
No. I think overall, Renata, you have statistics on, I want to say, on multifamily development in the last, I don't know, 5 or 6 years, maybe?
You're looking for the built densities?
Yes.
Yeah, so we did distribute that information to the GPAC as part of the response to questions, I believe. For the January 4th meeting.
If we could maybe circle back on that, next time around. I don't want to tie us down on that point, but just want to acknowledge that point's been raised. Sarah, are there any other public comments out there?
I don't see any other hands raised at this time. Okay,
great. Thank you. And for those who spoke up, thank you very much. It's good, thoughtful questions and comments, and we're all trying to get our hands around this. I'm going to bring this back to the group. And I think there are a couple of folks that had some follow-up. I want to make sure we get to them and then spend some time on this spreadsheet. So I've seen Matt, and I think Carol had her hand up earlier, but Matt, you've got your hand up now.
I'll defer to Carol if she had a question.
No, that's good answer. Thank you.
Question to Mike, I guess, and maybe to Diana also. Of the different types of buildings you talked about, which ones would lend themselves best to a mixed use environment, Mike? And what does that do to the density?
Yeah, 90% of housing developers do an awful job of commercial on the ground floor. They make no money doing it. It's an afterthought. They just want to appease the city and just throw some gratuitous space in there. And it struggles, right? The bay depths are not deep enough. The back of house isn't thought through. So we as a city, thank you for raising that, Max. It's a very good point. If we want an activated street front, we have to have some very concise and robust language in our zoning. that the retail spaces have a chance of success, and that the developers are required to think through bay depths and widths and storefront heights and the typical stuff that a coffee shop or a restaurant would demand. So that's an important point. And then I'm sorry, Matt, I'm having a blanket now. What was your other question?
No, that was my primary question, Mike, and I think you've answered it. And I guess, Diana, from your experience, have you had experience in helping cities put in the type of language that Mike talks about to make sure that we've got a vibrant, first floor commercial in some of these mixed use environments?
I'm sorry, Sarah.
I was just thinking that is something that might go in the objective standards or in the zoning regulations.
Yeah,
not
thank you.
the element itself, but we certainly can work with folks who do that.
I'll defer. Thank you.
Christine, you got your hand up.
Are we supposed to just be asking just any questions now, or are these supposed to be ask? So I had a question, for example, where the cancer center is going, isn't that going to be over by the De Silva site?
Take a look at this spreadsheet, and I think maybe try to winnow out some of this with respect to the red. Look at the green and so on. So maybe we'll get to that. And if you got a site-specific question, maybe.
Well, no, it's actually a little more. It's kind of more on that small unit question. So I was thinking that cancer center is going over there, and are they going to have apartments over there for long-term patients and their families? And if so, what is considered a dwelling unit? Because we could build apartments that become 30-day or less, right? They could be an apartment, but we have an ordinance that says you cannot have a vacation rental. However, would that unit, let's say we did have a 30-day, we didn't have that. So would a vacation unit count as a unit? Because at some point it could be rented as a full-time unit, but it's not. So how does that work as far as these numbers are concerned?
To answer your first question, the Cancer Support Society does not have any residential units as part of the project.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the state doesn't necessarily, and Diana can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know that they care about the type of unit as long as it's a unit. Functionally, it wouldn't necessarily be able to be counted as a very low or low income unit because those need to be deed restricted.
Okay, so, all right. I'm just trying to figure out ways we could get smaller units in that would cost less because they would be a shorter term tenant, so to say. So, but that is possible, right? It could be, in theory.
So
right.
And Mike, I'm not sure if the term of the tenancy changes the construction costs necessarily, right?
No, I mean the term of the tenancy generally not. No.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out ways that we could, work in smaller apartments that would, in theory, cost less, right? And then they could be considered lower income.
Yeah, but we can't control that. I mean, we basically lay down the density, and then the developer will come in and determine their market-driven mix between studios, 1 bedroom, 2 bedrooms, and 3 bedrooms. And the only thing I was pointing out is in our city, there would not be a robust demand for small units as a general rule.
Right. But, if we look at this a different way, maybe we could figure out, because one part of our job at GPAC is to try to find different ways to get these things accomplished. Right. So, yes, I understand that these maybe from a developer standpoint, perhaps, but it could be more intriguing if it becomes something else too, right? For housing units, sort of like the Ronald McDonald House for the Children's Hospital, right? They've got those units for families that come in and have treatment for their children. So anyway, just food for thought. And then I had some other questions. I'm a little concerned, honestly, about our schedule. I think Sarah, it said we have 3 meetings to get this thing tied up and then we were going to make a recommendation. Are we going to be able to do that without looking? We can't do that without the EIR. When's that coming?
So that's anticipated to be out before your next meeting.
The actual one or the draft?
It's draft. It will be draft until it's finalized by City Council. And the final EIR is actually just a response to the comments that we received from draft EIR.
Okay, so in other words, in other words, by our next meeting, we'll have the EIR and that will go to the council, they'll approve it, and then it comes back to us, or we just do all of our decisions based on a draft?
Correct. So in SQL world, it's called a draft, but it is the actual analysis. And I know Anna can speak more clearly to that. Go, feel free.
Yeah, I had my hand raised for that. So a draft EIR is the final document, or don't think of final and draft in terms of like what you would at school. So a draft EIR is the document that's released to the public and that the public provides comment on. And then a final EIR is responses to any comments that were received from the public and agencies and everything upon review of the draft EIR. So if you ever look up an EIR online, you will always find a draft EIR, and that's the one that has the chunk of the information. The final is like the fine-tuned responses to any comments, but you always want to look at the draft EIR as the primary document.
Okay, so it's
counterintuitive. It's counterintuitive, but the draft EIR is the public. The internal drafts are called like admin draft, screen check draft, and we don't ever see those. The public doesn't see those. That's what staff checks for spelling and consistency.
So if I'd interject, I mean, we talked about this at that joint meeting, but it's a tight schedule for us because it's a tight schedule for planning and it's a tight schedule for the city council. And we really can't afford to delay it on our end because that backs up everything else before it finally gets to the council, because there's a process then with HCD reviews all this. So it's like, it's a pay me now, pay me later thing in terms of the schedule. Because if we get our part delayed and it ripples through with the planning commission and the city council, it could be make this all really difficult when everything comes down to HCD in the very end of this. So that's why the schedule.
Okay. All right. So, well, I guess we'll start talking about specific things now, sites now then, and because I want to revisit that stuff that Elliot talked about, you know, the info sites in the shopping centers. Are we gonna have a bit more longer discussion about that, or?
Yeah, my thinking is we will. I kind of want us to, I think we've got the spreadsheet with the 194 separate thoughts that went into all this. I think the idea is to sort of like, maybe we got the red, we got the orange, yellow, and green, and maybe spend some time just to kind of winnow this down if we can. I think it'll make our work easier next week if we can do that. That's the idea. And I'm also conscious of time because we're pushing 8 o'clock. Anything else, Christina? Because I got Stella question.
No, have her. I'll think of something later, I'm sure. Thanks.
Thanks. All right, Stella.
Yeah, I hope this is the right time for this question. It's just a general one about the spreadsheets. I noticed in a lot of the comments, it was things like maybe difficult because multiple owners or is a functioning, viable business. And so I'm just wondering, generally speaking, has staff gone and checked the lease terms for a number of these locations? And then also has staff asked owners of the orange sites in particular if they're considering selling or having any thoughts about that?
With respect to the lease sites, yes, we have checked some of them, not all of them. And the sites that we have determined would be good sites to include are ones that are available. In terms of the sites that were like aggregate sites that we have not yet like completely included in our analysis. I'm not sure. Staff, tell me about what's going on with those.
So we do have a letter drafted to ask whether or not they are interested in selling or aggregating the sites. And we'll be sending that to see whether or not they will be interested.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, historically, we haven't received a response from those types of letters, but we will reach out and see what we can accomplish.
And you think you'd get that before GPAC has to make their recommendations?
We likely wouldn't have that information by then.
Okay, so then we won't know anything about the details, I guess, of the orange sites. It just seemed like there was some of the staff comments were kind of hypothesizing without maybe actual data. So I just wanted to clarify. I think one in particular in my mind, and I don't want to get into line items yet or take the conversation there, but like Big O tires, for example,
right,
comes into my mind as one of the ones that brought these questions up in my mind.
Yep. We'll
we can talk more about that. Yeah.
Yeah. We'll talk about the oranges and the apples and all this in just a minute, hopefully. Okay. I don't think I see any other hands up. So what I'd like us to do is to take a look at this nice spreadsheet here. And I think there's a few, let me just think this out here. So this was helpful for me in that I could see the annotation was useful. The feedback from HCD was helpful. I think since we're on the topic of fruit, maybe we pick the low hanging ones first. To me, that'd be the reds, which is, to me, it's like we can, I think, dismiss those from our review. And so just to kind of lop off a category, but I kind of want to make sure that that's where this group is, or do people feel a need to spend some time on the red coded line cells here where maybe they think we should be including them?
Jim, as a suggestion, do you think maybe just if somebody thinks a red square should be included, they can just speak up?
Okay.
And that way, we don't have to go through every one of them, just the ones that somebody thinks should be included.
Yeah, thank you. I don't want to go through every one of them. So on the topic of the red coded sites, are there any in there that people think should be included in the mix? Otherwise, we'll dismiss them. I don't see any hands. I see a hand. Carol. And you're muted, Carol. Carol, I'm sorry, you're still on mute.
I do not think the red one should be included. They're mostly apartments. But I think if people are going to make a suggestion, they need to say why. I mean, if they suggest a site, then what are we all going to discuss, whether it's good or not, or is Diana going to tell us, or how are you going to deal with that? So we don't get into a huge discussion about every site.
Yeah, I like that. I just thought we could maybe lop off the red ones.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't see anyone advocating for any of those sites at this point. I see people shaking their heads. Okay, the reds are out. So that we've done, Sarah, we've done something here. And so maybe on the other end of the spectrum are the green sites, where based on the review at staff and the discussions with ATD have the highest probability of success with HCD. And so I think I'd like just to maybe spend some time on the greens, but I'd like to flag a few things. One of which is there are some sites that are identified as green that we're going to talk about next week. Bart, De Silva, Terraces. I think those are the three, because they really deserve some thought on their own. And maybe the way we treat them interplays with the buffer, for example. So I kind of like to bracket those ones and maybe talk about any of the other green sites to see if we want to include them in, and maybe just to help organize this, so we're not jumping all over the place, maybe do it by the map area, if you don't mind. So in map area 1, for example, there are 5 sites, all green. I think the bias here would be to include green unless I hear otherwise. So map area 1, any comments on that?
Yes.
So this would be to exclude, I'm sorry, Carol, you got your hand up, let me let you go.
We're not looking at the workbook, right? Because the way I read it on the complete list, you say there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sites. And on the workbook, there are only 3. So
for the comprehensive list, as I understand it, and staff can check me on this, is the big spreadsheet.
Right.
In map area 1, there are 5 parcels identified, all of which are green.
Right.
That's the comprehensive one. I think we want to be there.
Correct.
Okay, but when you're asking us to approve the 5, there are already 2 gone from the workbook.
That's because there are duplicates.
Okay.
No, I'm sorry. I have to jump in here. The 2 missing from map area 1 that are shown on the complete list are actually pipeline projects. So they're showing on the bottom of the workbook. So they are included, but Woodbury Highlands is a project that's under construction, and Celia's is the Brant, which is also under construction.
Okay.
And the
pipeline. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, great. So we're in map area 2. There are 4 sites there, all identified as green. Any issues with any of those? Otherwise, we include them. Don't see any hands raised. I see a hand raised. Susie. Susie, you're mute. I'm sorry.
Sorry, I was anxious putting up my hand. So I don't love those sites because of the congestion around there already. I think building on those sites is really going to slow down traffic. From what I'm seeing on this map anyway, maybe you have a better idea, that they'll be set back from the street, etc. But that is a very, very congested area because of Trader Joe's. Already there's a lot of buildings going in there. It's a lot of traffic. We have the city offices around there. It's not my favored site for places. So
no,
that's my opinion on it.
And this is a bit of a Sophie's choice here, I think, in that if we say no to those, we've got to find them elsewhere.
Right.
So
and it may not be all of them. I was just looking at the addresses. Let's see. Sorry, I'm trying to go between this view and looking at this map. And what I'm seeing, like the Kelly Moore is not a problem. The Diamond K, that's right in front of the city offices. That's a very busy area. So that's the one that I see kind of as maybe the no-go on that. The Kelly Moore, I think that's actually a really good site. Close to the reservoir, that's kind of ideal. So I don't know, can we pick and choose? Or can we just say, no, we don't like the number 2, or we like one of the 2? I mean, is that what our discussion is?
Yeah, go ahead, Matt.
On to what Susie's saying, I think at this point, it's not whether we plan for them. We're just saying, should we have those for consideration for next week? Am I understanding you correctly?
Yeah, that's basically it. I mean,
right. So if we think these 5 are green, we just say they're green, and then some of us may decide, because of traffic issues, things that Susie brought up, we personally would exclude them from our own recommendation. But tonight, it's just, should they be considered? Is that the only question?
And do they have to be considered as a lot, like these 5 are being considered, or can we say of these 5, we think 3 are good, 2 maybe not so much. I mean, how are we doing it with the zoning?
So in the workbook, you'll want to just make a 0 to the ones that you're excluding.
Perfect. Okay.
And then see what that does to the total.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you, Susie. I think, Don, you've got a question? Don, you're on mute, sorry.
In reality, each one we exclude, we still have to find 2,100 units. So you can say yes, yes, no here and here, but you got to find it someplace else, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a Sophie's choice. Carol, you got your hand raised.
Yeah, I think I brought this up before, but this Dudum Hannah is that whole corner, the sushi place and going down Mountain View. It's that whole big corner. So my question before was, if you take one away, I don't know whether Susie means to take all those properties away, that whole big corner, the parking lot and all those businesses, or can you just take one away and it's still a viable not spot zoning? Or how many? Could you leave Sushi and Diamond K and take the others? Or what keeps it as a not spot zoning, as an area itself?
Sure. So I think if you include any of the parcels in that planning area, all of that would need to be rezoned to whatever density you set. If you want to exclude a specific site, that won't be included in the inventory list that we give to HCD. But like we've been saying, if you have to still meet that total number plus the buffer.
Okay, thank you. Properties there.
Yeah, Christine, you got your hand up?
So I think, isn't the West End and the East End housing by right? So wouldn't they be able to go and use the density bonuses anyway and all that? Or can we really control? I mean, everything down there could be housing, right?
Correct.
Regardless. So we have to leave it in the list.
Well, again, it's the inventory list. It's the sites that we specifically think can and maybe probably will be developed.
But if in this 8-year period, right?
Okay, so in theory, it doesn't matter though, because it's housing by right anyway, right? So that doesn't count, even though we know it's going to be eventually. Well, I mean, it has to be in here, right? We can't take it out if it's housing by right anyway, right? Why wouldn't we want to put it in?
So I think we're conflating the uses that are allowed on in a particular area and the sites that we have to demonstrate to HCD that can accommodate the number of units that we've been allocated.
Yeah.
So there's the inventory list, and then there's the zoning and densities.
So I would understand it. We could have sites that we are not on our arena list but get developed. That happened, I think, with some of the sites in the prior cycle. And the obvious difference is that we have a 5 times factor more of arena than we did in the current cycle we're in now. So I think, Christine, your point's a good one. If they're housing by right, it would like make one think, okay, well then maybe we should just include them because
they're going to be anyway, right?
Yeah. And whether they develop or not, we have no control over that, or the city has no control.
Right.
So that may be something to think. That's a great point you raised. I think we're good with, so that we're going to leave map area 2. Susie raised a question on the Diamond K parcel, but I think for now we'll just leave them in so we can kind of try to get our hands around all this. I'm going to move to area 3, which is like the center of the downtown. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 parcels that are coded green in that. I see, Christine, your hand's up. Is that from before? Or?
Sorry, leftover.
Okay, all good. Anna, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Can staff just clarify the city parking lot and adjacent? It's a corner site, vacant commercial parking lot. Which site, what's the corner that it's at? I don't know off the top of my head. I'm trying to figure it out.
It's across from the Roundup.
Your Uncle Ian.
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
Kill
Okay,
Road.
perfect. Thank you.
Next to the mural.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. With respect to map area 3, the greens, any arguments to leave any of those out? Okay, no hands. We're going to move to area 4. I'm skipping over the greens and the yellow, the orange and the greens, orange and the yellows. Helps if I wasn't colorblind. To get to area 4, we've got a couple of parcels identified in the green bucket, green category. Any issues with those? Christine, you got your hand up.
Actually, I'm gonna wait until you get to, I wanted to bring up the La Fiesta Square and why that got dropped from the list. So that's not quite where we're ready yet, but I wanted to get my hand up.
Okay, yeah, we're not quite there yet. I think that's okay. Yeah, that's I think not a green.
Right.
That's okay.
Okay, so we're gonna go to area 5.
Oh, so we're only doing
count-
greens? We're only doing greens right
We're
now.
doing greens, yeah.
Okay, sorry.
This is very methodical and tortuous, but I kind of want to make sure we get through all these in as least a painful way as possible. Area 5, which is on the east end, north of Mount Diablo, on the east end of downtown. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 projects there. Some of them are pipeline. Any issues there where we'd want to exclude any?
When you say pipeline, what does that mean?
Yeah, well, they're under the Corporate Terrace project, for example, is in this cluster. That's already under development or entitled. So it'll likely show up as an actual project sometime in this RENA cycle.
Right, the pipeline projects are ones that have started the development process, be that they've been either approved to be developed or they're under construction, and they will be completed during this planning cycle. So we can count on those units during the planning period.
Yeah, they have the highest probability of happening. Okay, I don't see anything else on 5. Going to 6, greens again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of those. One of which is a pipeline project. Madison Park. El Chado's in there too. This is that area, east end of town, south of Mount Diablo. Okay? Don't see any hands. Christine, I think your hand is for La Fiesta Square. So I got, skipping over here to area 7. We've got 3 greens there. Now, these are the BART projects, Deer Hill. And I'd like to bracket these because there's a more detailed conversation to have about how we approach BART. We're going to talk about that in the next meeting. So we're going to bracket and skip over these. Otherwise, we'd be here till 3 a.m. And then area 9, De Silva. Again, I think that's a whole separate conversation. We'll talk about that next week too. So we're going to bracket De Silva and move over. And then we've got area 13, which is the area on the southern flank of the downtown.
I have
yes, Carol?
The Brazzoni site, the Rosedale. It says this appears to be the Brazzoni site at the corner of Moraga and St. Mary's Road, but it's 833 Rosedale Avenue, which is completely different. That's the Moraga Road site. You see what I'm saying? It says Rosedale, Brazzoni. Okay, that's her house, I think. And it says this appears to be the Brazzoni site, the corner of Moraga and St. Mary's.
Correct.
No, it's not Rosedale.
Correct.
And I don't know about the APN number. Is it?
It's the Brazzoni site. It's not Rosedale. It was somebody put a pin in that to recommend the Brazzoni site at the corner of Moraga and St. Mary's Road.
Yeah.
And they filled in an address that wasn't the Brazzoni site.
So it is the one at the corner
Correct.
of the Braga and St. Mary's Road.
Correct.
Just to be clear.
All right, so we'll fix that in the next go round.
Yeah, and it doesn't have a house.
But with respect to this area 13, we got a cluster of green sites. All good with those? Don't see any hands raised. And then we've got scattered sites flagged here. And I don't know if Sarah or anyone talk on this. One of these is terraces, which again, we're going to bracket that because we're going to talk about that next week. Any I don't have an issue here, but are there any questions or clarifications on those ones? Otherwise, I'll include them.
Yeah, I do, because what are they? I mean, it says single family homes. I mean,
correct.
Where are they?
We don't know. It's based on an average of development in every year in the past few years. Same with ADUs. We don't know where they'll be developed, so we just have a number there for those. That's what the scattered sites are.
Okay, it's not homes already built.
No.
No.
Okay, all right.
To Matt's point, I think it's a plug number, but it's based on experience, a track record, or data. We're going to argue HCD that even though
correct,
we anticipate 240 ADUs over the cycle of this RENA cycle. Oh,
so those are ADUs.
The additional dwelling
family
units.
Homes.
Yeah, those additional dwelling units.
Yeah, one is new second units. The one above are single family homes.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they're two different things.
Yeah. Okay. Don, you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, I looked and didn't see right across from Oakwood, not in the De Silva property, but next to Orchard Nursery, apartment complex down there, and there's a vacant lot right on Mount Diablo Boulevard.
It's included in next to the multifamily residential unit. It's included in the De Silva site.
Oh, okay. Even though it has nothing, it's not a De Silva property, though, is it?
Correct. Well, it is owned by De Silva, but it is a secondary site.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And we're going to talk about De Silva next week. So,
no.
Okay, so we've gone through the reds, we've dropped them. We've gone through the greens, we're going to keep them. Susie flagged one as a question mark for Diamond K, which we'll likely talk about again. But for purposes of like this work we've got to do, greens are in. And we may want to revisit a couple of specific ones depending on how things work out. I want to turn to the yellows now. And so looking at this master spreadsheet again, I'm skipping over the map areas 1 and 2. I'm going into 3. There's only one, which is the Millie's Kitchen site. And again, so these are the ones, as I understand it, Diana, where based on feedback from HCD, we think we have a reasonable chance of success in pitching this to HCD when we do our arena process. That's kind of the thought process here, right? You're muted, I'm sorry.
Correct. Yes.
Thank you. Don, you have your hand up. Is that for this or is that?
No, I'm sorry. I didn't take it down.
Hey, Tim, if I might make a recommendation to the plan, I think we were planning to focus next week's discussion on the yellow ones.
Okay.
And tonight take care of green, orange, and red.
Okay.
Because yellow takes a little bit more conversation and
right. Yeah, we want to give due time for those.
Okay.
Next.
Thank you very much. I'm glad you flagged that. Otherwise, we'd be here till 3 o'clock in the morning. So we're
the orange sites, yeah.
So we're in the basket of fruit. We're going to the oranges now, and which is in map area 3. And these are the ones, Diana, I'm going back to you again, where we think based on HCD feedback, we have a lower probability of success here.
Correct.
So we could include them, but there's a risk that they get bounced.
Yes.
And we have to come back at this all over again, or maybe have a higher buffer to compensate for the risk.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
I have a question.
do you have a question, Carol?
Yes. All right, if the orange are not red, does that mean if we fool around with them, or if there's some in the green, or I mean, how do we then treat the orange? What do we do with them? We already have all the green and the red. So would we put them in the yellow, or what do we do with the orange if we like it? Let's say we like one of them.
Right,
So
I think
then what does that become, green, or what do we do? Or if we don't like, I mean, what do we do with orange?
So I think then we would include that in that other spreadsheet where we used to sort of like play with the allocation. So orange is just the color coding for a lower probability success parcel. We could include it, but we need to recognize that HCD may not bite on that one. They may decide that it's
Right.
a gas station, like the one at 3632 Mount Diablo, is not viable, and they'll kick it out. So we need to be realistic about the risk there.
Right.
So I think the bias would be likely to not include the orange ones unless someone speaks up for one. So,
Correct.
Thank you, Diana. We'll make sure you get that right. I see Susie, and then Carol, your hand is still up. I got Mike. Susie, please.
So my question on Lafayette Plaza, I take it that's between the Whole Foods and the Safeway, right? So that area in there. So couldn't it be kind of ideal for a mixed use? Because I mean, it's got so much space. It seems that you could keep all those retail, and those retail, a lot of them, aren't even that busy. But to put in units there, it just seems, I know there's the EV Med easement behind, but again, that just seems so ideal. It's so close to BART, all the shops, everything downtown. I mean, it's a great area. I mean, if I were living in a place like that, I'd be like, yeah, awesome. Got all these things. I can walk into Safeway, get my food. I mean, it just seems kind of like a perfect site because of its location. I mean, I don't know if the owners would want those up there, but I think you could put, 4 stories and you wouldn't even notice it because it's tucked behind like that. So
It could be, yes, it could be, but the state specifically said for that site, we could only consider infill in the parking lot, that we could not consider redevelopment of any of the retail uses, including McCullough's and the strip between McCullough's and Whole Foods,
Right.
or anything to Safeway. It must only be in the parking lot.
That changes it. That's unfortunate.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
Mike, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I don't know if I can advocate for my own property, but I suppose I can. So on the east side, Deer Hill Road, right across the street from the I think my property is labeled orange, and I would like to, have it under consideration for an opportunity site, because to me, it's a lot like the De Silva Gates situation, where it's just more or less, undeveloped, sort of, big chunk of property. And, you could create about 4.5 to 5 acres of relatively developable land there.
Thank you. And we didn't include it because we had concerns about the fact that we would have to upzone not just the property for Sierra Ranch, but also a bunch of, sites around it, and that it was outside of what the city council approved for, specifically for the CEQA analysis. So if we had to include that property, we would have had to change the CEQA analysis as well. That's why we didn't approve it, or we didn't recommend approval for it. It's not that we don't think that you have a great site. It's that in the conditions that we're currently working with, we didn't think it would fly right now.
Yeah, I think we're operating within the four corners of this, of the EIR.
You're right.
This is outside of it. So I want to finish the oranges here. We're in area 3. Don, you have a question?
Yeah, I'm looking for Brown Avenue. I'm not placing.
Brown Avenue, like 1020 Brown Avenue, etc.
Just what page are they on? And
I
Brown
don't have it
Avenue
in front
across
of me.
Clear Hill is all vacant. Brown goes up the hill.
So there are in map area 5, those are yellow sites, which we can discuss next week or next meeting.
Okay, I just couldn't find it on here.
Yeah, so it's page 3 in map area 5.
Yeah, okay.
But I think we're working.
Okay, now I found it. Thank you.
Great. Stella, you've got your hand up.
Yeah. Are we going in order? Are we going like through the map areas
I hope so.
sequentially? Because we were bouncing around some different places and I'm getting a little disoriented. I want to talk about map area 3.
Thank you.
Which I think I heard you say.
I was trying to go there. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Excellent. So I understand the rationale about sites that are difficult to change, like ownership, for example, chain stores. But I just want to say for the record that the Chevron on Happy Valley Road is 1,000 feet walking distance to BART. And I just don't see that as the best and highest use for that particular location as a gas station. But that's just my opinion. I think because it's adjacent to some other parcels that I think are in the green and yellow category, it's something that's worth reconsidering perhaps. And then I guess also, sorry, Jim, did you have a question?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Are you in area 3? I'm trying to find what you're referring to.
Yeah, area 3. I'm sorry. I just named it by the business. 3632. That's my watch. 3632 Mount Diablo.
Okay, thank you.
So, I mean, maybe it's just more of an editorial comment, but we have this corner. It's 1,000 feet walking distance to BART, prime transit-oriented development location. So, I guess it is what it is, but the other one that I wanted to raise was the 3576 Mount Diablo. And I'm not sure if that goes all the way from the corner at Oak Hill where the city parking lot is. There might be a couple separate parcels there.
There's multiple parcels on the sheet here. This is the Lavash restaurant, I think, is what we're talking about here now. It was Rustic Tavern.
Yeah. There's a boutique, there's Lavash, there's I think Chabad.
Chabad is there.
Yes.
The Learning Express, and then one that kind of is the old vape shop, and maybe another that's kind of always vacant, not rented.
The one next to the parking lot, the city-owned parking lot, is one that's often vacant, and the ones to the west of that were ones we considered, but felt like they have, even though they have a revolving door of uses, we felt like we couldn't consider them for the inventory. Just the parking lot and the one right next to it on Mount Diablo.
Oh, so you do have that one right next to the
Yes.
parking lot?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Just
okay,
one parcel. There, some folks nominated other parcels even further west, which were, they're very low rise, they're like 1-story development, et cetera. And we thought about that and decided that because of the state's concern about viable uses, we couldn't include them. But the one at the corner and the one next to it, we have included.
Oh, okay. Is that in map area 3?
It's in it should be, and if not, it should be. It's actually in the spreadsheet that you get to play with.
Okay.
It may be a mistake. I'll need to look at it.
Okay. Yeah. No, I'm glad you mentioned that because I didn't see it in map area 3.
Yeah, we did.
But that's
We did
helpful.
include it.
And that parking lot that's at the edge of the western edge of that set where Lavash restaurant, is that also part of that?
No, there are completely different parcels. So we only included the one right at the corner of Oak Hill and the one right next to it until such time as we get an indication that we could include it. We may be able to, but right now we can't because it's an ongoing viable use. The one right next to the parking lot is often vacant. I think it's probably for lease right now. So that's why
I'm actually speaking of the other parking lot. So if you go down the block toward the west, there's a parking lot that I think is for those businesses. Is that part of the parcel right there?
Not right now, no.
So that parking lot is independently owned?
Yes.
So separate from the Lavash and boutique.
Yes.
So could that parking lot be considered an opportunity site?
It could, but we would, because there are so many, it's a very small site.
Right.
And we need to be able to aggregate sites enough to make a viable development, which is not necessarily a half an acre, but closer to a half an acre, a third of an acre. But there are all those businesses down that way on Mount Diablo are incredibly small sites.
Yeah.
And they're almost exclusively owned by different owners. And we can't include them.
So I think we kind of need to hone in on what sites have the greatest probability of clearing HCD.
Right now, yeah.
Yeah, and the small, and also these smaller sites aren't going to generate a ton of units anyway. So this is me. I don't want to dominate this, but I'd say my skew or the bias on the orange ones is to probably leave them out because they have a lower probability of success with HCD. But if folks feel like a given site has merit to be considered, let's talk on that. I kind of want us to move off of map area 3 unless there's something that people want. I mean, the comments are great. I'm kind of with Susie on the Lafayette Plaza project. I think that would be great for housing, but it's a square peg and an HCD's round hole, it sounds like, and that's our problem. Stella, you have your hand up. Are you good or?
Oh, you know what? I heard you talking Lafayette Plaza. Which is that? I see it on the spreadsheet, but where is that? Is that the Plaza Center? McCallow's and Safeway? Yes.
Yeah, McCullough's all the way up to Whole Foods, I believe.
Okay. And so my question there is, so why not submit to HCD usage of the parking lot area?
We could, but we felt like the difficulty of vetting that through the community would be really difficult.
Yeah.
It's just a huge lift.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Because I know in Rockridge, there was a redevelopment of the Safeway on College Avenue at Claremont that I think was a surface lot. So it's possible, but I understand what you're talking about, community.
We also don't have a track record of doing that. And so we would need to be able to demonstrate that we could do that. And if there are not any jurisdictions around us that have done it, like immediately around us, who have the same sort of community profile, if you will, as Lafayette, we could not pitch that to the state.
So it's kind of a catch-22.
Right?
It's like we'll never get there, right? Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. Christine, you got your hand up. Is that on this map area 3 oranges?
Yeah, I'm not ready to say goodbye to all the 3s yet. I feel like we can still talk about it. And I kind of feel the same way that Stella does. That whole shopping mall, and I know like parking lots would be upzoning, but I mean, would that be something interesting to the owner to upzone if it was offered to them? So I guess, because those are older buildings back there, they're not super attractive. And as a matter of fact, I feel like some of them back there could be apartments already. I don't know. I definitely don't want to vote on the yellows yet, or the oranges yet.
So,
but I do want to revisit that shopping center.
Okay, so maybe we circle Lafayette Plaza, that site. And again, I guess the risk here is, as much as it might be a great site for mixed use housing, commercial on the ground floor, it may not fit HCD's rubric.
Well, if we give them a compelling reason why it might be, couldn't we talk them into it?
I don't know.
Probably not.
No.
They've already said that we have to do it a certain way, and if we don't, they won't approve it.
Well, they're asking us to find creative ways on how to build affordable housing. So
Well,
we
need to but we need to demonstrate that we have a track record for doing this kind of development, which we can't do.
Yeah.
Well, we also don't have a track record for making affordable housing either. So, I think we should look at everything really carefully and see if we can come up with something creative.
Well, yeah, I think the issue is we're playing a game based on someone else's rules. So that's that's just the way the game is played. If you include the site, I kind of think it'd be a good site for housing, honestly, as much as it may not satisfy HCD. But the way you could maybe do that would be say, okay, we just need to up the buffer. The theory being that they may not take that site, in which case we need to have a fallback. So maybe for now we could circle Lafayette Plaza, but I think we just need to be aware that we might need to think about the buffer if you include that, because there's a probability it will fail, and in which case we need to fall back on something else. So just kind of want to put it out there. Carol, you got your hand up? And
yeah, quickly, we have on the worksheet, we have all the numbers. So if we take the orange, what do they add to the buffer on the worksheet? Or if we already have the numbers on the worksheet and we're going to consider oranges, where do those numbers go? They just add to our RENA numbers?
Theoretically, yes, but there are no oranges on the worksheet right now.
Well, that's what I mean. If we're considering it, where are we going to put it on the worksheet? The worksheet already with the green and yellow has the numbers. We meet the numbers. So then what do we do with the orange?
We would add them to each area. Yes.
We don't need to add them though.
Right now, we could add them, and if we added them, we would be able to reduce the density ultimately that we needed to essentially accommodate the RENA allocation. Right now,
all right,
the worksheet, the workbook only contains green and yellow sites.
Right. So that was my question. What do we do?
So my understanding then, to paraphrase you, Diane, on this, is that there'd be an extra row added, which would be, let's say Lafayette Plaza, for example, it's an orange. And so by doing so, we increase the volume of acreage that we could work with. But we just need to be mindful that that may not fly with HCD.
Right.
And we'll need to probably up the buffer. So there's a trade-off here. And I think we just need to be realistic.
Well, could I ask if so we don't get too long, if we have a number of orange sites to be considered, before we really analyze it, could Diana just ask HCD if they will accept those?
We already did. And the orange sites, HCD said, would be very difficult to include.
Okay.
And that's why they're orange.
Right.
Okay.
And the level of analysis needed to justify them is so it's considerable, and we don't have a track record to include any of the orange sites, and that's why they're orange.
Yeah.
So we should be careful about putting them in.
I would agree with that. From now then, based on, I think, some of the feedback, that one site, Lafayette Plaza, I think maybe we include in the spreadsheet. Again, we're going to need to talk about the buffer, and I think that's where we'll have to like really compensate for somehow. I really want us to move on. To map area 4. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 orange coded sites in that, all commercial, gas station, and so on. Anyone advocating for any of those? I see Stella and then Christine.
Yeah, actually, it's mainly more of a question. For the one that's labeled 3557 Mount Diablo Boulevard, it says that it's newer development, appears to be adjacent to Clock Tower building. But when I looked at it, it was like that Poke Go Thai restaurant next to Roundup, which are not new development. So I'm bringing it up because it's an acre, 1.2 acres, so it's not insignificant in size.
Sarah, do you have that one? I don't have it up. Can you draw it up, or you or Renata draw it up on the spreadsheet at least? Which one is this?
It's in map area 4 and it's 3557 Mount Diablo Boulevard.
Six. It's the 6th one down.
Okay. Nail spa, barber shop, and a Lafayette Park and Ship.
Oh, that one?
Yeah.
3557.
Yeah.
Okay. The reason this was considered orange was because it's a newer development, even though it's a big site, that there are functioning uses in there, that it's next to a big development, the Clock Tower development. We need to look at sites that would be ripe for development that might be underperforming, and this did not, in our estimation, was considered underperforming. It has a lot of really, active uses in it. That's why.
Okay, but it is that strip of small businesses because they're not in the newer development building, so that's what I wasn't clear about. They're old buildings, really old, probably cinder block.
The constraints is what you're looking at, right, Stella? This newer development.
Yeah, it says newer development. Yeah.
We can edit that. Sorry.
Well, it's okay. I mean, I didn't know where I was with it. I looked at the
Ongoing
map and it
commercial
told me,
uses is the most important thing.
Yeah. Okay. The other one I have is 3523 Mount Diablo. That was that triangle corner 76 gas station at Golden Gate Way.
Yeah.
That one was for sale when we were doing the workshops.
Yeah.
For opportunity sites. I know it's tiny, but.
Well, the state said if it's a gas station, you can't include it unless you have a program to redevelop gas stations, including site mitigation. And if it's a gas station of a national chain, you can't include it or shouldn't include it. And that's what was going on here.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. I see Christine and then Susie.
So now we're on the 3529 Mount Diablo Boulevard. So that's the La Fiesta Square.
Correct.
And that one was for sale, wasn't it? A little while ago. So that means that the owners probably want to sell it or would sell it.
They did sell it.
Oh, they did sell it, and they're not going
Yes.
to. They don't. They did sell it, and they are only want to do commercial there.
Presumably, we don't know, but the requirement from the state is that if it's a newer building and that it has had viable uses in it, it's not an underperforming site. It's a newer building. There are no reasons for us to consider or assume that the development would be it's in a situation that could be reused the way it is. And so the state, we specifically asked the state about this, and they said, you can't or should not consider this.
So, but okay, am I thinking about the right place? Isn't this
La Fiesta Square?
This is the one with the giant parking lot, right? And it's got the one-story building side where Chow is.
Yep, exactly.
But that's a giant parking lot. I mean,
Doesn't matter.
That doesn't make any sense, though. We don't even know what they're going to do with this. Why can't we just upzone it? And then that would give them incentive to make it residential and mixed use.
We can't assume that the use will change even if we upzone it. Unless the developer or owner says, I want to change the use of this.
Well, okay. I don't understand why that, to me, doesn't make any sense. We're talking about doing like a work, live, trying to make people stop commuting and all this stuff. It would be perfect to have all those residentials above all of those retail and restaurant. So that just doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, we're not dealing with sense. We're dealing with the state and what they have the expectations for.
We're at the Mad Hatter's Tea Party.
Right, but if we talk to the new owners, if that's the case, I thought they hadn't sold it, but I mean, if we haven't even had a conversation with the new owners, wasn't that part of it? Like the city can go in and start talking to the owners and seeing what they'd be willing to do with it? Isn't that what you guys do?
Yes.
But we don't know. So why are we don't want to take this out yet until we talk to the new owner.
We can't include it based on anything that the city has done in the past unless we have a track record, which we do not have.
Well, that doesn't make any sense.
And the development is a relatively newer development, and we can't assume that it will be redeveloped with anything else.
So I think similar to Jim's point about the Lafayette Plaza, we could put a pin in this one and kind of,
I think that's a good idea.
Once we have, once we're discussing yellow sites, we could bring this in the conversation. And in the interim, we can try and reach out to the new owners.
Great.
But I think, there's a potential, like Jim's suggestion, to include this, but with the asterisk of adding a buffer and not relying on it necessarily, because it is a higher risk of being shot down.
Yeah, and I think just to help us move on, I think, why don't we put a pin in it? We'll add it to the spreadsheet, but again, we're playing a game where someone else has made the rules and dealt the cards. So we just need to be real about that. And if the site produces, I don't know, 75 units, let's say, maybe the buffer should go up 1 for 1 to match that. Don't want to get ahead of that conversation, but that might be some way to mitigate the risk that we get turned down on that site. Susie, I see your hand up, and I think I see Matt.
Yes, so I agree with it being on the back burner. I would love that as the site too. I think it would be ideal, but I understand the complications with it. But I don't think any of the other sites should be considered. I just don't think it's worthwhile even looking at them, specifically gas stations or any of those smaller spots. One, we need gas stations in Lafayette, and we need them on Mount Diablo, so they should just be left there. And the other spots, I don't think it's worth fighting for. So anything that's in orange in number 4, I think we should just say no and move on to the next ones because they're not worth fighting for.
Okay, thank you. Matt, you got your hand up.
Yeah, Jay told me that last deal with La Fiesta Square fell through and that he was taking it off the market for a little while. So Diana, you got some information in the last 10 days. But that's what I heard from Jay, who's the head of the chamber.
Okay.
Helpful, thank you.
And I see the mayor's got her hand up, or did. Nope, okay. So I think then I'd like to move us off of area 4. We're gonna put a pin on 3529 Mount Diablo Boulevard, which is La Fiesta Square. It'll roll up into that other spreadsheet, but just you need to recognize we may need to play with a buffer on that. Okay, anything else? Then I want to move us to area 5. There are 2 sites there, Big O Tires, who has replaced several of mine, and the veterinary center. So Those are two active businesses that have been there for a while. Anyone recommending they be included on the list? Christine, I see your hand up.
I recommend this stay on the list, or at least we talk about it.
Stay on the, I mean, like,
You're talking about the, let's see, what is it?
the two sites in Area 5.
Right, the veterinarian center, medical center, what is that? The animal hospital, and then the Big O tires. Why? Yeah, can we keep that in there too to talk about?
The animal veterinary center includes the so-called Lemos Center, which is a very large site. Yeah.
Which one is that? That's got that 2-story building on the right side, and then that little shopping mall in this where the soccer store is. Is that one you're talking about?
That's where the hideout is.
I don't even know where that is.
No. I'm not exactly sure how to describe it. We can definitely put it on the list to discuss further. How's that?
Yeah, I like that. And also that Big O tires too, if we could.
It's behind where the soccer store is, Christine.
And so that was a problem because of why? Well, let's talk about it. Let's move on.
Okay. Matt, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I don't think we should talk about them. We've lost enough businesses to housing development, and they're both viable businesses. They serve a lot of local people. And some of the complaints we've heard in the past is, we've lost too many businesses, and those are viable businesses.
Yes.
So just my opinion.
I agree.
Okay. Thank you, Matt. Susie, you got your hand up, and then Dawn.
Yes, are we, I agree with Matt on this because I don't want to lose any businesses either. But can we not suggest mixed use? Or is that not in the mix? Can't we say, yes, we want this site, we would keep businesses on the bottom and then go 4 stories up? Because again, that's kind of an ideal spot. And putting housing in there would really open up so many opportunities for the businesses and for people to live, be close to freeways. It's kind of perfect. But I don't want to do it if we have to lose the businesses.
Yes, definitely. You can propose that.
Yeah. Having gone to Big O Tire several times, it's a different kind of business than your ground floor retail type of setup. So not sure how that works. Don, you got your hand up.
Well, my question simply was, from Big O going back up that road parallel, I think it's next to the post office annex. There are a lot of interesting warehouse kind of buildings on the top of that hill. And is that down here in orange, or it should be green, I would think, but you know where I'm talking about? The post office has an annex, and the road comes down and lets you onto Mount Diablo Boulevard right there at Big O Tire. And then you go all the way back. And I don't see.
Yeah. Are you talking about Blackwood Lane? Because there is the post office annex behind Belterre. Or are you saying about that? We're talking about something much further down Mount Diablo to the east.
No, not Big O. Oh, wait, you're talking about Big O, not the tire company that's next to Vol. Okay.
No, that one is Conti.
That's Conti Tire.
Yeah, Conti is already a site on our list.
Okay. I was misthinking. You're right. Okay.
All right, great. And I got you up, and then Christine.
Oh, thank you. As a whole, I do feel there are plenty of sites that we can all identify in Lafayette that are existing retail or commercial that are, for lack of a better word, junky, that could do to be redeveloped. But I think maybe we're getting a little off topic, and if staff could maybe just, or Diana, just give a really, really high level reminder of what HCD is looking for and what we need to be considering when we're identifying our sites for counting towards the RENA numbers. Could you guys just possibly give that reminder really quick?
Yes, please.
Sure. The HCD is looking for sites that are easily developable within the next 8 years, from 2023 to 2031. They are looking for sites that are underperforming, i.e., it's not the best use of the site, or the site it's an older building that could be redeveloped. It's looking for sites that we can aggregate easily. Like, there are three small sites that might be developable together. They're in common ownership. They're looking for things that would be essentially the low-hanging fruit. We don't have any vacant land in Lafayette, pretty much. There are a few sites that are vacant, but most of it is not. And so we have to rely on redevelopment of sites that have existing uses. So we need to understand what are the existing units on existing uses on the site, and how easy it would be to redevelop them. And that's really what the ask is. It's not about finding, hey, we've got 3,000 acres of undeveloped land that we can put housing on. We have to really look at each individual site and understand its likelihood of redevelopment. Does that answer it for you, Anna?
Yeah, it does. So personally, the fact that I think the shopping center between Diablo Foods and Trader Joe's can use a revamp kind of doesn't matter, because Lafayette does not have a history of doing that type of large scale redevelopment at this point.
I'm not saying it's not a good idea.
Oh, no, I understand. No, I know you're not saying that. Yeah. I understand. Thank you. And hopefully that clarifies for moving our discussion along.
Thank you, Anna. Christine, you got your hand up.
Okay, so I guess, I understand that we have to look at, the potential of a building being being actually changed to what we would be zoning it to. But there are some, is this not a location? Let's talk about the tire store area or the veterinary office building, the medical building there. If it's residential by right anyway, why wouldn't we include it? Because it is, right? It's going to be anyway, whether we put it in there or not, it is a possibility.
Because it already has a viable use on it that is actively visited. It is, people go there and people use it. It's not a use that is sort of underperforming. Big O Tires, people are going there every day to get their tires replaced. That is a viable use. We cannot consider for our inventory sites that have super viable uses. And that includes things like Big O Tires. It includes, fast food restaurants and other sort of national change gas stations. They have specifically at the state said we cannot include them.
And I think it might be helpful to just differentiate between housing by right and the intention and purpose of opportunity sites.
Right.
So
Thank you.
housing by right is like housing is allowed on all commercial districts in the downtown. And that's what that means. So Christine, you're totally right that housing can happen anywhere in the downtown. However, we are required to identify these specific parcels that are likely for redevelopment in that 8-year period. And so we, technically everything could be redeveloped, but we need to call out specific properties that will likely be redeveloped in this 8-year period to accommodate RENA. And so it's, something like the McDonald's could be redeveloped for housing because there's housing by right, but is it likely in the next 8 years? No.
So what about that corporate terraces? Was that building mostly empty? Is that what happened with that? Because wasn't that was all commercial space, right? And then they
a lot of office.
It was a
It was-
combination. It was a combination of some office use that was no longer happening, plus a sea of parking in a development that was Class C or Class B commercial. So this development was not prime for additional commercial uses. And so when we shared with you in your packet about what HCD said in terms of things like converting from commercial to residential, one of the things that came up was developers in the Bay Area looking for Class C or Class B commercial developments with a sea of parking with low FAR. That means buildings that are maybe 1 or 2 stories tall. And that's classically what corporate terrace is or was. It was like a very small footprint of a building on a sea of parking. And that's what developers look for.
So upzoning for residential, doesn't that increase the value of the property? in
Of
theory?
course. Yes, of course. But unless you have a track record of certain kinds of development, like corporate terrace, we cannot include other things in the inventory.
Okay. Thank you.
Stella, you got your hand up?
Yeah, I mean, what came to mind was corporate terrace, but I think I understand what Diana was describing. But so once that's all done, then we do have a track record for redeveloping commercial office space.
Yeah, we can and we will include that in our inventory, and we have. There are a few office developments that we have decided to include in the inventory. For example, AT&T. Off the top of my head.
Okay,
So
thank you.
the one thing I'd like to point out with respect to Big O Tires is 0.71 acres at 35 units per the acre, and given the 85% yield factor, it's roughly 21 units. I mean, that's kind of what we're talking about here. So it helps, doesn't move the dial. And my bias in this would be these are ongoing businesses that have been around since I've been here, and there's lots of traffic going into them. So in terms of like probability of success with HCD, which to me is like the game here, I kind of think that'd be on the low end. We can include it in the spreadsheet, I think, if people are adamant about that. But we just need to recognize that we're trying to get at something that has a decent probability of success with respect to HCD, and we'll have to likely compensate with a higher buffer to make up for the risk. So just put that out there. So I want to put a pin on this one, folks. So are we, maybe just get some nods or thumbs up or whatever with respect to zone map area 5, those 2 oranges, are they in or out? And I just get like a flag. I see no, 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 Don's a no, Beth's a no. Okay, they're out. So that's the consensus of the group. We're going to move on. Area 6. Okay, so area 6, which is where the heck is that? That's the flank of the east part of downtown, south of Monte Alba Boulevard. There are 1, 2, 3, 4 sites here on the list. Taco Bell, Jack in the Box, and Ace Hardware, my favorite place. Carol, you got your hand up. Carol, you're on mute.
I'm sorry. We have a lot more oranges to go.
Yes, we do.
Do we have a time limit on tonight's meeting, or can we take a break? Or
I think we plowed
3 hours already.
Good point, well taken. It's 9 o'clock. I kind of think we need to go through this, so.
Well, how does everybody feel? I mean, it could be another 2 hours.
I think it We'll go faster as we go along, because I think we're getting used to kind of some of the issues and they'll apply to some of the others. So I think unless something comes up significantly different, hopefully we've kind of gotten a lot of the big questions out of the way. I think we've got to keep at this to get done by March 1st.
Yeah.
So no
That's my
time
vote.
limit on, okay.
Think that,
I may have to leave. Okay.
okay. All right. Thank you for letting us know that. Anyone advocating for any of the oranges in zone 6? If you guys, I see Stella with her hand up.
Yeah, I mean, I've been hearing what Diana and staff have been saying, but Taco Bell, Hamlin Cleaners, it's just a corner that's crying out for revitalization. It's not the highest and best use of that land. It's opposite our beautiful library. I guess that's my thought. But if HCD says, nope, keep your Taco Bell,
yeah,
that's,
We would agree, but I think that the state doesn't. They were very clear about Taco Bell.
I think the staff comment that says 4 small sites that poorly utilize the land says it all, but anyway. Anna, you got your hand.
All right.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I think revitalization is different than ideal for housing, right? Like that's the really unfortunate part. So just to add to that.
Yeah, point well taken.
Yeah, but the housing can be a means to revitalize, and that's just, you know, it's an opportunity.
Yeah. I think if we still had a redevelopment agency, it'd be another discussion, but okay, I'm looking here. I don't see any, as much as we're not big Taco Bell fans, maybe perhaps, I think we're going to leave that one off. Christine, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I thought you guys were done. Isn't there a small, okay, so let's see, I'm trying to remember what corner it is. So it's across the street from, I think there's the glass store there across the street. Wasn't there a smaller lot there that's now being turned into residential? It was a gray building on the corner. Vitality Bowl was next to it on the opposite side. Wasn't that a small retail something, and then it's been kind of slowly fading away, and now it's a gray building, and isn't that turning into housing?
It's Area 5, I think.
A pipeline, isn't it? Now.
Well, what I'm saying is that kind of looks like some of those other buildings, and I know there's some, there are active, companies in there, but are the owners of the companies also own the property? So in other words, what I'm saying is, those are older buildings, but like, once again, if we're going to upzone those areas, they can make a lot more money off residential, right? So they could sell it. Despite what business is in there, and then we could do the retail on the bottom and the residential on top.
I think the issue is we can't count on that happening for purposes of the arena allocation. Could happen, and the market's driving some of this, but for purposes of putting out something to HCD, we're kind of relying on other things that have, in their view, have a low probability of success.
The mayor seems to want to say something.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, just Christine, that property that you were talking about across from Merrill Gardens, that property was an old appliance store. Somebody else can correct me if I'm wrong, but it was vacant for a very, very long time. And I think it's still back to the point that we may want to change a bunch of these and provide this opportunity to be able to revitalize, improve, upgrade. Anna and others have said it, and Diana said it multiple times, but that's not the exercise that we're doing. But that particular property was vacant, a vacant business for a long time.
And go ahead, Sarah.
I was just going to mention that we also have a vacant and underutilized parcels map, which we help to work with developers if they are interested in developing in the city, which areas we think might be ripe for redevelopment. And if something is redeveloped, can count towards the arena allocation. It just can't count for the inventory for the certification. Yeah.
Yeah. So we do still get credit, even if a site is redeveloped and it wasn't an opportunity site, that still counts towards us meeting.
But we can't D-zone or take back what we've already upzoned, right? Even though we get credit for that one, if that makes sense. So it doesn't really help. So anyway, okay.
Okay. I'm looking area 6, the 4 oranges. Anyone advocating to put them in? Otherwise, we will move on. Moving on. Okay. Actually, there were, sorry, my bad. There were a few other ones in area 6 that I missed. The car wash, and which has got to be the busiest place in town here. So I think we're going to move on to 8. Thank you, Carol. There's one site. The Roble area 8 is, it's the Deer Hill corridor.
The orange side is via Roble.
Yeah, houses there are houses on the site, I guess. Anyone advocating to include this on our calculation spreadsheet? Otherwise, we'll move on.
But it's not in the CEQA study area. I thought we couldn't consider sites that.
Here it is, I believe. Area 8 is. That's the area. That's the Deer Hill corridor around Barton. I think the mayor is going to say something, or no?
The orange one in 8.
That particular, Carol's right. That particular one in 8 is not in the area.
Yeah, there's
Okay.
only one
Correct.
in 8. It's via Roble.
Okay,
It's up here on this off Dolores.
got it. Okay, so if it's not, then that makes it easy. We leave it out. Thank you, Carol. All right, we're going to skip. I think we've got a cluster on towards the end of this offered by different members of the community, just different scattered sites. And they're not in the CEQA study area though. And staff, I don't think, are any of these, I think they're all out of the CEQA study area. Is that right?
Except the St. Perpetua one.
The school. I don't think they're turning that over because the school has got, I think, a waiting list now. So these are all like outside the 4 corners of the EIR, as I mentioned earlier, or the CEQA study. So I think those are out. Okay. So I think we've gone through all of the reds are out, the greens are in. And with respect to the oranges, I think there were a couple of sites in map area 3, the Lafayette Plaza, map area 4, the 3529 Mount Yale Boulevard site, the Lafayette Square. I think those are the only 2 that I had from my notes that we'll include in the spreadsheet and we'll discuss further. I think all the other oranges are out. And so when we get into next week's discussion, we've got some of the specific sites I referenced earlier. We've got the yellows too. And that'll build up the framework for the sites, which will drive everything else, I think, once we know what we're working with. Okay. Unless someone wants to say anything else on the opportunity sites discussion, I don't see any hands up. We've got that affirmatively furthering here for housing outreach. And I'm thinking here, the group met, I think it was last week. Christine and Chris put together some really great work on the outreach side. Maybe a high level summary here, Christine, and people can provide you comments afterwards, perhaps. Yeah, should I maybe turn it to you to give us an update?
Sure. So basically we met, I think it was last week. I can't remember. It's all blur. We were just trying to figure out a way to kind of attack this list of stakeholders in a more organized fashion, because it was just kind of a laundry list and we were having a hard time deciding. So what we basically did was we broke it up into sort of a tiered system where we could, with levels of contact. So we haven't gotten to that part yet about how much contact we'd make with each group and who would do it. It's mostly staff, actually. But a lot of it is focused in on the Lafayette residents, homeowners. Sorry, that was my dog. and renters. And so now that we've got this list figured out, we kind of wanted to touch base with the rest of the committee to find out if we're going in the right direction with it. And then we would move on to how much contact we would make with homeowners, and then what type of contact for that group, for example. So we also determined that these stakeholder lists are going to change depending on what element we're going to be working on. And so therefore the housing element is what we focused in on for this part. And that's what we're working on now. So we talked also about, Chris Leash is not here today, but we have so many residents that are not being contacted or they just don't know about what's going on. I'm shocked on a daily basis when I talk to people and they have no idea what I'm talking about when I talk about the GPAC and the housing. So I wanted to propose or just pose a question to the GPAC committee about how they felt is possibly even breaking up the residents, Lafayette residents, into yet another group and having Chris Lee working on that with that group. And then maybe it could be part of the downtown or the Acalanes area. But I just wanted to kind of throw that one out there just to see how the rest of the GPAC felt about that, about possibly having her be representative for part of the residents. Does anyone have any thoughts about that?
Could you say that again, Christine, in terms of who specifically would she reach out to?
Well, sorry, my dogs are fighting right now. So basically we've got the Burton Valley, Release Valley, downtown, Acalanes, and Happy Valley. That's a lot of residents we're trying to reach. And like I told you before, and I've been telling you guys this over and over and over again, I'm always surprised at how many people have no idea what we're talking about. I'm just trying to find out different ways in which we can do better outreach and also get more input from the residents. So we talked about just the amount of neighborhoods that we're responsible for. And I think there's so many of them that it makes it difficult for us to do any more hands-on communications with them. So it's just an idea. And then also we wanted to get into what staff had planned for their outreach for the AFFD, or I can't remember the acronym. AFFH. Unfortunately, I didn't get to study that enough to present that. So I think staff would have to do that. But I think they wanted us to approve their community outreach strategy. Is that right?
Correct.
Not, I see.
So with regards to AFFH, we need to conduct additional outreach to specific groups. And we've provided an outreach strategy. It's already outdated, but we decided to provide the same version just for consistency of what everyone is seeing. So we are looking for GPAC's direction to implement this. We are aiming to have 2 events about fair housing in Lafayette and spread the word about the housing element concurrently in mid-March. So given this, we need to start promotion now. And this also requires us to translate materials, do an additional outreach from the methods we've been using previously. And so we are looking for that direction to go.
And this is really a staff-led, directed enterprise here. The GPAC's not directly involved with this, although I'm sure you'd like people to come to the program that you do. No.
Yeah, so I believe we are working with the outreach subcommittee to help disseminate the information as well. But most of the things laid out, and there's kind of a timetable. Most of those items would be driven by staff.
Okay. Any questions for Renata or Christine on this?
Are we going to get some kind of written plan later that we can review and understand?
For staff or for both of us, staff and?
Well, for many.
Staff already submitted theirs, the outreach strategy in the papers that they gave to us.
So I think we've got 2 things here, one of which is the Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing, or AFFH outreach, which staff wants to get underway. they just want to get our sign off on that. I don't know if you need a motion or not. That's one thing. And then there's our own outreach. And this is the work that Christine and Chris did.
Right.
And I think there I would suggest maybe people review it and maybe get comments to Christine and to Chris to follow up on, you know, and because I know we have this outreach subcommittee that'll kind of go through this again. Christine, with respect to what you're doing with Chris, does that work for you? Just to have people get your comments so you can kind of factor that in? Does that?
Well, I think that, well, first of all, the AFFH stuff, I think, is so heavily dictated by the, by the government that I would recommend that we just, let staff go ahead with this, just to let you know that.
Right.
So that's that. And then for our stuff, we just, I wanted to pose a question of possibly having an additional residential representative. That was something I did want to bring up with the GPAC in total, because, that would have to be something that we all decide. Just because it is a lot of people that we're talking about for residents. And then just to get an idea if we're going in the right direction by making tiers for amounts of contact. And what it really means is that especially for the neighborhood reps, it means more work is what it is. Because we're going to have to start doing some organized outreach to the residents quickly, because all this housing stuff is really important, and then other things coming down the road. So it's kind of setting it up for later too, as well. So
Chris is our at-large representative,
yeah.
And she'll be here at the next meeting. So I'm kind of thinking for something involving her, maybe we just defer that part to when she's with us. Anne, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Chair, that we wait till Chris is here, only because I like the idea that since she is the representative at large, that maybe she step in, and Christine, if there are neighborhoods that, or certain people, that maybe in a given session need more help, but we have to also keep in mind how GPAC was originally formed, and people put in for a lottery to represent their, the neighborhood or one of the regions of Lafayette. And I think we just need to be careful and respectful of the process as well as to how we all got here. So something to be mindful of.
Thank you, Anna. Beth, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, and we're also waiting for written information from the city's communication director. So some type of brochure or flyer or something we could disseminate so everybody in town gets similar information. So it's not as emotional as it is informative. And that'll really help us in designing whatever type of outreach we do, especially to businesses, to nonprofits and organizations. And anyway, so I don't know when that might be ready. I think it's been a couple of weeks.
Okay.
Sarah or not. Or maybe we can have something ready for the next meeting that we can review together.
Yeah. My inkling would be to have Chris in on this part of the conversation.
Yeah.
And maybe suggest that folks really, the materials that Christine sent out, I thought were really good. And I think people should get their comments into her and Chris and Beth, the subcommittee. That's Carol too. And maybe in the next session with Chris here, we can kind of talk through that part further, because I'm also want to be mindful of the time. With respect to the AFFH part, I don't know if staff's looking for a motion on this or just a nod. I
think a general nod would be okay.
Okay. And I think in as much as this is an agenda item, we need to get public input. I think we've, any questions or other clarifications on this topic? Otherwise, I'm going to open the floor to the public.
If you would like to put comment, use your raise your hand function at the bottom of your screen or *9 if you're calling in. I do not see any hands raised at this time.
Okay, great. So then I want to just kind of, I don't think we need a motion, but like a thumbs up with respect to the materials that the staff provided that with regards to the affirmatively furthering fair housing outreach so they can get the thing launched. Do any people have any issues, concerns, objections to materials here, or are they basically good with it? So I'll do this or that. I see. Okay. It's like the Roman Colosseum. It's a thumbs up. Okay. So I think staff, with our blessing and best wishes, go forth and prosper on the outreach. It's important, and I'm glad that we're doing that. And hopefully that'll keep HCD a little happy. I think that brings us to through the main part of the agenda. There's just housekeeping and staff updates. I have one. Are there any housekeeping items for folks? I've got one, just to give you guys a heads up, because I'm expecting in the next day or so a press release from the governor's office where he's naming me to the California Housing Finance Agency Board.
Wow.
They had approached me after I retired from the bond world to be their bond debt administrator, and I kind of passed on that. And they asked me if I'd be interested in a board spot. So I said, sure. I applied, and it sat there forever, and things kind of picked up. So I've gone through a round of interviews and with different staff. It's sort of not directly what we're doing as GPAC, although frankly, the work at GPAC has been really helpful in understanding the grassroots side of this. They deal really more with the bond financing side, multifamily and single family mortgage revenue bonds and stuff like that. But if I pick up things along the way that might be of interest to this group, I will share. So I just want to let you guys know that, because, I mean, I don't know, something may show up in the paper somewhere in the back of a want ads. So that's that.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Good job.
Yeah, thanks.
And you will continue to be chair, correct?
I was thinking of dumping it up to the vice chair, but
he's an idiot. Don't do it.
Don't do that. No, this is what happens when you don't play golf. You got to fill up your time somewhere. So, okay. The last item is staff updates. Sarah, you wanted to give us an update on?
Sure. I think this actually came up last time, but just wanted to formally announce that Jonathan Fox took a position with the city of San Jose, so he is no longer helping the GPAC crew.
So he's defected to Silicon Valley. So we wish him the best. He was a good person to work with. And on that note, unless there's anything else, my clock shows 9:30, so 3.5 hours. Thank you all so much for sticking with this. Really, this is the big hill to climb for all we're doing, and your input and thoughtfulness has been really makes a difference, and it'll make a difference when we finally deliver something to planning. So have a great night, everyone.